Hey guys, tonight we are going to leave our warm beds, our well-stocked fridges, and our delivery apps behind and travel back to a time when your next meal was not only uncertain, but almost certainly terrible. Imagine for a moment the worst meal you've ever had. Maybe it was a suspiciously grail-looking airline chicken or a burger from a gas station that you knew even as you bought it was a profound mistake. Now imagine eating a far worse version of that meal every single day for your entire life. That is where we are heading. And let's be honest, faced with the daily reality of this menu, you probably won't survive this. The sheer nutritional bankruptcy and filth would send a modern immune system into a panic from which it would never recover. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet, simple way to support the channel. And in the comments below, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I always find it fascinating to see our little community stretching across the globe, sharing this quiet moment. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your world has shrunk to the size of this room. It's a single cramped space, what historians would call a peasant's crock house. The walls are a rough mixture of mud straw and animal dung, known as doveyel and daub, clinging to a crude wooden frame. There are no windows, only a couple of small shuttered openings that let in either a sliver of gray light or a blast of frigid air, but never both in moderation. The floor is just packed, earth damp and cold, under your thin leather turn shoes. The air is thick, a permanent fog of wood smoke from the open hearth in the center of the room. It stings your eyes and coats the back of your throat. A constant acrid taste you've known since birth. This smoke is your only defense against the swarms of insects that live in the thatched roof above you. And it's a trade-off you accept without a second thought. In the middle of this smoky, dim reality hangs the single most important object in your life, the great black cast iron cauldron. It dangles from a hook over the low smoldering fire, the silent soot-stained god around which your entire existence orbits. It is your family's stomach, its furnace, and its clock. Your day begins when something is added to it and ends when you take your meager portion from it. This pot is never empty. It is never scrubbed clean. It is a living, breathing, simmering entity, a continuous cycle of sustenance and survival. And what's inside, you ask? You already know. You've known every day of your life is pottage. Don't imagine a hearty, flavorful stew. Erase from your mind any notion of a chunky vegetable soup or a creamy porridge. This is the ancestor of those dishes, but it's a grim, primordial version. The base of your pottage is whatever grain you manage to grow on your small strip of land, grudgingly allocated to you by the lord of the manor. It's usually oats or barley coarsely milled into a rough grit. Sometimes when the harvest is poor, it's just the sweepings from the mill floor, dusty mix of grain chaff, and whatever else was lying around. This grit is tossed into the pot with water dipped from a nearby stream, the same stream where the villagers' animals drink and relieve themselves. Into this watery gray will go the vegetables from your stove, the small garden plot next to your hut. You throw in whatever is available. A handful of wrinkled peas, a tough, stalked leek, the outer leaves of a cabbage, a few small woody turnips. Nothing is peeled, nothing is chopped with any care. The dirt still clinging to the roots just adds to the texture, familiar grit between your teeth. This isn't the farm to table experience that modern foodies romanticize. This is a desperate attempt to add bulk and stave off the gnawing emptiness in your belly for a few more hours. Sometimes you might get lucky. You might find a few wild herbs like nettles or dandelion greens while gathering firewood. You toss them in not for a burst of bright, herbaceous flavor, but for the vague, bitter greenness that momentarily cuts through the monotony. Historians still argue whether the contents of the peasant's cottage pot varied significantly by season or if it remained a depressingly consistent burial year-round. While summer might offer more greens and autumn more root vegetables, the fundamental character of the dish, a bland, gritty, brownish sludge, remains unchanged. This is what's known as a perpetual stew. The pot is never fully scraped out. You eat your evening meal, and whatever remains becomes the base for tomorrow. In the morning, you'll add more water, another handful of oats, maybe a wilted carrot. The flavors, such as they are, just layer and mingle over days, weeks, even months. It's the original slow cooker, except the goal isn't to develop deep, complex flavors. It's to prevent the absolute disaster of an empty pot. You are, in effect, eating a soup that contains the ghosts of last month's meals. It's a sobering thought. A little bit of that sour cabbage from 3 weeks ago is probably in the spoonful you're about to eat right now. The taste is a generous word. It is overwhelmingly soul-crushing, is soul-crushingly bland. The primary flavor is of damp grain with an undertone of earth and smoke. Sometimes if it has been simmering for too long, or the weather is warm, it takes on a slightly sour fermented tang. The texture is the worst part. It's a grainy, lumpy slurry like watery cement mix or wallpaper paste. It's thin one day, a thick spoon, staining sludge the next. You don't chew it so much as you just process it. You swallow it down, feeling the lukewarm mass slide down your esophagus and settle heavily in your stomach. It's not food as you or I would understand it. It is fuel. It is the barest minimum required to give you the energy to get up tomorrow and work in the fields from sunup to sundown, which will in turn provide you with the grain to make more of this exact same pottage. The cycle is as inescapable as the mud on your floor and the smoke in your lungs. It is your life simmering in a pot. You lift a spoonful of the lukewarm pottage to your lips, but the act is incomplete. It's too thin, too unsatisfying on its own. Your other hand reaches for the second and arguably more important component of your meal. It sits on the rough-hewn table beside your wooden bowl, a hunk of bread. But again, you must dismiss any modern image your mind conjures. This is not a crusty sourdough, a fluffy bride, or even a simple, wholesome whole wheat loaf. What you have is a wedge hacked from a dense, dark, heavy round. It's less of a loaf and more of a geological specimen, a brownish gray disk of compressed gloom. This is the bread of your daily life, and it is a sorrowful thing indeed. Its official name might be Maslin bread, a common type made from a mixture of wheat and rye grown together in the same field. A medieval farmer's clever hedge against one crop or the other failing. More often, though, especially in leaner times or farther north, it's made purely from rye or even barley. The flour isn't the soft, powdery dust you know. It's a coarse, gritty meal full of bran and bits of husk. The color is a dismal gray-brown. The texture dense and close crumbed, and it carries a distinctly sour, earthy taste that you've long since stopped noticing. It is in every sense the polar opposite of the Lord's bread. You've seen that before on feast days carried up to the great house. It's called man-cheek bread, and it's made from the finest sifted wheat flour, rendering it shockingly brilliantly white. It looks as soft as a cloud. Different species of food entirely. Your bread is not a cloud. Your bread is a fist-sized rock. You don't have an oven in your one-room hovel. A private oven is a luxury you cannot even conceive of. Like everyone else in the village, you're bound by law to use the Lord's communal oven. This is a mainstream historical fact known as a banality or feudal due. The Lord builds and maintains the oven, and in return you must pay a fee to use it often in the rim of a portion of your dough. So once a week, if you're lucky, maybe once every 2 weeks. If you're not, your mother or wife would have made the journey to the village baker, carrying the family's dough. This infrequency means your bread is designed for longevity, not pleasure. The loaf you're eating right now could be 10 days old. Fresh bread is a memory that lasts for about a day before it begins its inevitable transformation into a brick. This is where things get truly grim. The bread itself is already a nutritional powerhouse of sadness, but it often contains more than just flour, water, and starter. Historians debate just how widespread the most egregious forms of adulteration were. But personal accounts and court records from the period make it clear that it was a constant fear and a frequent reality. Everyone in the chain from the miller to the baker was looking to stretch their profits. Your precious grain taken to the mill might come back lighter than it should, with the miller having taken more than his fair share to make up the weight or to bulk out the flour. All sorts of unsavory things could be added. Fine sand, chalk, dust, clay sawdust from the mill floor. All of these could be mixed into the flour. Sometimes cheaper fillers like dried and ground peas or beans were used, which were at least edible, if not exactly what you'd paid for. The result is sitting in your hand. You can feel it as you chew. There's a persistent, low-level grit. It's a texture you're so used to you barely register it consciously, but your teeth do. By the time you're 30, your teeth will likely be worn down, flattened by years of grinding, not just coarse brand, but literal sand. A toothache for you is not an inconvenience. It's a potential death sentence. And if you're unlucky enough to get a loaf with a higher concentration of filler, You'll feel it in your gut. A heavy, indigestible knot that offers bulk but no nutrition. It is the ultimate culinary scam. Food that makes you feel full while quietly starving you. You could probably build a wall with this stuff, and some days it feels like that's what's happening in your intestines because the loaf is so old and hard you can't simply bite into it. You use your knife, the same all purpose knife you use for mending tools and cleaning your fingernails to saw off a piece. Then you plunge the hunk of bread into your bowl of pottage, holding it there until it softens. It soaks up the thin, greasy liquid, turning into a soden heavy sponge. This is how you eat it. This is how you make the bread and the pottage into a single cohesive meal of brownish gray mush. The flavors, the sourness of the rye, and the blandness of the grill merge into the singular taste of survival. You eat slowly, methodically, working the gritty, soggy mass around in your mouth before swallowing. There's a strange and quirky tidbit from the time about how you define your social status by your bread. The whiter and finer the bread, the closer you were to God and the King. Your dark, heavy loaf marks you, defines you, keeps you in your place. It is the perfect symbol of your life. It is hard, it is monotonous. It is full of hidden grit that wears you down day by day. And you must be grateful to have it at all because, as bad as this bread is, the only thing worse is no bread. And that is a terror you will soon come to know. The last of the soden bread and pottage settles in your stomach, a familiar heavy weight. But it's a weight that brings no comfort tonight because you are acutely aware of how little is left. The sack of mixed grain in the corner of your hut, which seemed reassuringly full after the autumn harvest, now sags loose and pathetic. The remaining salted fish in the barrel are few and leathery, and the last of the dried peas have been scooped from the bottom of their sack. You're entering the most feared time of the year, a period known to agricultural historians and more intimately to you as the Hungry Gap. This is the grim interval of late spring and early summer, roughly from May to late June or even July. It is a cruel paradox. Outside, the world is bursting with new life. The days are growing longer. The fields are turning a vibrant green with new shoots of wheat and barley, and the birds are singing in the hedgerows. But for you, this explosion of life is a form of torture. It is a promise of food that is still weeks or even months away. The bounty of nature is visible, but it is not yet edible. The new crops are too young to harvest, and the last year's food stores are, to put it simply, gone. The terror of the Hungry Gap is not a sudden dramatic event. It's a slow, creeping dread that begins in the dead of winter and builds with each passing week. You've been rationing for months, cutting the daily portion of the pottage, making the bread with more filler and less flour. Now the rationing has reached its crisis point. Your meals, which were already meager, have become ghosts of their former selves. The pottage is now little more than brownish water with a few stray grains and a single lonely turnip floating sadly in the pot. Your stomach, which has known a low-level ache for months, now clenches with a sharp, insistent pain. You see the effects everywhere. The village, usually a place of quiet, rhythmic work, has become subdued. People move more slowly, their faces gaunt and pale. Usual chatter and laughter of children is gone, replaced by a fretful silence. You look at your own children, their limbs thin, their bellies starting to swell slightly, a telltale sign of severe malnutrition. Their usual energy has evaporated, leaving them listless and quiet. It is a quiet that terrifies you more than any scream. You feel a constant low-grade dizziness when you stand up too quickly from working your strip of land. Your own body is starting to consume itself. A mainstream historical fact of this period is the sheer vulnerability of the food supply. There was no global network, no refrigerated transport, no way to import food from a region that had a surplus. You were entirely dependent on what your village could produce and successfully store. A single bad harvest caused by too much rain or a prolonged drought was a catastrophe. A blight on the crops or a disease that swept through the precious livestock could tip the entire community into a famine. The Little Ice Age, a period of climatic cooling that began in the 14th century, made these bad harvests far more frequent, turning the annual hungry gap into a recurring nightmare of potential starvation. Your waking hours become a desperate, endless calculation of calories. You find yourself staring at things you would never normally consider food. The leather of your shoes, the straw in the thatch. You chew on a twig of willow bark, not for nutrition, but for the bitter distraction it provides. The hunger is a physical presence, a hollow ache that gnaws at your insides and fogs your mind. It makes it hard to think, hard to sleep, and hard to do anything but obsess over the emptiness. There's a quirky and sad little detail from this time, the June sickness. While not a formal medical term, peasants spoke of a particular listlessness and illness that befell them in early summer. It was quite simply the physical manifestation of prolonged severe hunger. Their immune systems were compromised, making them susceptible to any passing disease. A simple cold, which you might have shaken off in the autumn, could now blossom into a fatal pneumonia. A small cut sustained while working with a tool could become infected and lead to a slow, agonizing death. Your body, starved of fuel, has no resources left to fight. The lord of the manor and his family are, of course, immune to this. They have a dove cote, providing a year-round supply of tender young birds. They have fish ponds stocked with carp and tench. Their granary is vast and well protected. It contents save for them and their retainers. You see the smoke rising from the chimney of the manor house kitchen, and you know that up there they are eating. They are not just surviving, they are dining. The injustice of it is a sharp, bitter pill. But you're too weak, too consumed by your own family's plight to feel the anger fully. The hunger smothers everything else. Historians still argue about the precise mortality rates during a normal hungry gap. But it's clear that the elderly and the very young were the first to perish. You look at your aging father, his breath growing shallow, and at your youngest child, and you feel a cold wave of despair wash over you. The green shoots in the field are a race against time, And it's a race you are not sure you can win. The simmering pot is almost empty. The gnawing ache in your stomach has become a constant companion. A dull fire that dictates your every thought and action. The hungry gap has tightened its grip, and the meager rations of pottage and gritty bread are a distant memory. Survival now depends on what you can find, what you can glean from the edges of the cultivated world. Your focus shifts from the empty hut to the vast, intimidating expanse that borders your village, the woods. The forest is a place of deep ambiguity. It is the Lord's domain, a jealously guarded resource, but it is also a place of potential sustenance, a wild lure that could mean the difference between life and death. And so you become a forager. You trudge out at dawn with a rough burlap sack and a desperate hope. Your eyes scanning the ground, the bushes, the trees. This isn't a pleasant ramble in the woods, the gentle communion with nature. This is a high-stakes treasure hunt where the treasure is a handful of calories and the penalty for failure is starvation. Your first targets are the familiar, the safe bets. You gather nettles, carefully pinching the stinging leaves with a piece of cloth. Boiled for a long time in the pottage pot, they lose their sting and provide a welcome if slightly bitter green bulk. You dig for the roots of dandelions, tough and earthy, and gather their bitter leaves for a salad, a grim medieval version of a salad likely undressed and tasting of dirt. You look for wild garlic, a plant whose pungent flavor is a shocking and welcome explosion in a world of blandness. These are the easy wins, the low-hanging fruit of the foraging world. But they are not enough. They are wisps of nutrition, not the substantial food your body craves. So you have to go deeper, look harder. You start digging for roots you've only heard about from your grandmother. You search for pig nuts, small nutty tubers that are delicious and nutritious, but maddeningly difficult to find. You have to trace their thin, delicate stems down into the earth, carefully digging around them with a stick, or your bare hands hoping to unearth the small brown prize. Finding one is a moment of triumph, but it's a tiny victory. You'd need to find 100 to make a meal. This is where the danger truly begins. The line between an edible plant and a deadly poison is terrifyingly thin. This is a fundamental historical truth of foraging. Desperation breeds carelessness. You look for what you hope are wild parsnips, but they bear a striking resemblance to hemlock waterdropwort, a plant so notoriously toxic it earned the nickname hemlock. A single root of this plant contains enough poison to kill a cow, and its toxins induce a horrifying death. Starting with a rich light grin on the victim's face, a phenomenon known as a sardonic smile. You've heard the stories. Someone in the next village, a whole family wiped out after making a pottage with the wrong white root. Every mushroom is a gamble. You know a few of the safe ones, the big obvious field mushrooms that grow in the common pasture. But in the dim, damp light of the woods, 100 other varieties sprout from the leaf litter. Some are a gift of rich, savory flavor. Others will make you violently ill for days, wasting precious calories you don't have. And a few, like the deceptively beautiful destroying angel or the death cap, will kill you. The death is a particularly cruel one. After eating it, you'll feel fine for a day, maybe even two. Then the violent stomach cramps begin, but by then it's too late. The toxins have already destroyed your liver and kidneys, and you're doomed to a slow, agonizing demise. You stare at a cluster of pale mushrooms, your stomach roaring with hunger, and you have to make a choice. Is it worth the risk? Historians still argue about how much botanical knowledge the average peasant truly possessed. Was it a rich inherited wisdom passed down through generations, or a haphazard collection of folklore and risky guesswork? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You know some things for certain, but the edges are blurry. Him and the hunger makes you willing to gamble in those blurry areas. You might use folk methods to test a plant, like rubbing it on your skin to see if it irritates, or tasting a minuscule amount to check for a burning or bitter taste. But these methods are unreliable, more superstition than science. A quirky and rather grim tidbit from this era is the concept of a full hope meal. This was a meal made from the most questionable, borderline edible things you could find. Bitter acorns that required days of leaching and running water to remove their tannins. Tough tree bark that could be ground into a flour-like substance, even mosses and lichens. These were foods of last resort, things that offered the faintest glimmer of survival when all else had failed. They would fill your belly, but they would tear up your insides, offering little to no real nutrition. It was a way to trick your body into feeling full while you continue to waste away. You return to your hut as dusk falls, your sack heavy, but not with treasure. It holds a collection of wilted greens, a few muddy roots that you pray are the right kind, and a handful of sour, unripe wild berries that will set your teeth on edge. You empty the contents into the pottage pot, adding water from the stream. As it heats, a thin, swampy-smelling soup begins to form. You watch it bubble, the unidentified leaves and roots swirling in the murky water. You know that this meal could save you, or it could kill you. You're so hungry, you no longer care which. You just need to eat. The thin forage soup from last night did not kill you, but it has not nourished you either. The hunger is a physical beast now clawing at your insides. It hollows out your thoughts, leaving only one primal, overwhelming desire for meat. Your body craves the density, the fat, the iron, the sheer life-giving substance of it. You can almost taste it, a rich, savory memory that feels more like a dream. But this is a dream you are not allowed to have, because the most readily available source of meat, the creatures teeming in the woods and fields around you, is utterly forbidden. You stand at the edge of your small strip of land, looking towards the great forest. You can see a flicker of movement, a deer stepping gracefully between the trees. In the distance, you hear the grunt of a wild boar. The air is alive with rabbits, squirrels, and pheasants. To your modern mind, this is a landscape of opportunity, a free-range butcher shop. To you, a medieval peasant, it is a landscape of temptation and terror. For you, the act of hunting is not a sport or a pastime. It is a crime called poaching. And the penalty is not a fine or a slap on the wrist. It is mutilation or death. This is the reality of the forest law, a set of brutal legal codes established in England by the Norman kings, most famously William the Conqueror. This historical fact is central to understanding the peasants' plight. The forests were not public land. They were the king's personal pantry and playground. He and the nobles he granted rights to were the only ones permitted to hunt the beasts of the chase, primarily deer, but also wild boar, wolves, and foxes. To enforce this, vast swaths of England were designated as royal forest areas, subject not to common law, but to this separate draconian legal system. A royal forest wasn't just woods. It could include villages, fields, and entire communities, all living under this oppressive jurisdiction. The punishments were designed to be a terrifying deterrent. If you were caught hunting a deer, you could be blinded. You could have your hands or feet chopped off. For repeat offenses or for killing a stagger, the penalty was often hanging. Even lesser offenses carried severe consequences. Cutting down a tree for firewood in the royal forest could get you flogged. Owning a dog that was large enough to potentially chase a deer was illegal unless you had it lorded or expedited. A charming process where 3 claws were cut off one of the dog's front paws, rendering it incapable of running at speed. The message was clear. Everything in the forest belongs to the Lord, and you will pay with your body if you try to take it. You feel this law in your bones. It keeps you weak. It keeps you compliant. The Lord and his guests will ride out on a great hunt with dozens of men, a pack of baying hounds, and a festive air. They will slaughter more deer in an afternoon than you could eat in a lifetime. They do it for sport, for the thrill of the chase, and for the status of presenting a magnificent roast at their feast. You do it or dream of doing it simply to feed your starving children. The injustice is as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. So you resort to the shadows. You become a creature of the night, a silent, desperate thief. You can't hunt deer. The risk is too great, the animal too large to hide. You focus on the small fry, what was contemptuously called vermin by the nobility. You learn to set snares. Using a bit of twine or a carefully bent sapling, you fashion a small, subtle loop, placing it on a known rabbit run. It's a delicate art. The snare must be perfectly positioned, perfectly tensioned. You check these snares in the pre-dawn gloom, your heart pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. Most days the snare is empty or it has been sprung by a leaf. But one morning you find it a rabbit, its neck caught tight in the loop. The surge of triumph is immediately followed by a wave of pure terror. You are now in possession of illegal goods. You quickly kill the animal, wringing its neck with practiced efficiency, and shove it into your tunic. Every shadow seems to hold a forester, the Lord's warden, whose job it is to catch people like you. The walk back to your hut is the longest journey of your life. You feel the rabbit's cooling body against your skin, a damning, life-giving weight. There's a quirky and fringe belief among some historians that a whole subculture of poaching signs and signals existed. A certain branch laid across a path, a particular knot tied in the grass. These could have been messages between poachers, warning of patrols or indicating a good spot. Whether this is romantic folklore like the tales of Robin Hood or a reflection of a hidden reality remains a topic of scholarly debate. For you, there is no band of merry men. There is only you alone and terrified. Back in the hut, the atmosphere is thick with conspiracy. You skin the rabbit quickly, the movement swift and furtive. Every part of it must be used, and all evidence must be destroyed. The skin will be burned in the fire late at night when the smoke won't be noticed. The guts will be buried deep in the garden. The meat itself, a pathetic amount, once divided among your family, is the greatest risk. You can't just roast it. The smell of cooking meat would travel, an aromatic advertisement of your crime. It must be chopped into tiny pieces and thrown into the perpetual pottage pot, its flavor and substance disguised by the familiar murky grill. As you eat the pottage that night, you search for the tiny morsels of rabbit. Each small piece of meat is a jewel, a burst of flavor and strength in a sea of blandness. It feels like a sacrament, a holy communion of defiance. You watch your children eat, seeing a flicker of life return to their eyes. And you know with absolute certainty that you will do it again. You will risk blindness and death, not for riches or glory, but for the taste of meat and the survival of your family. The illicit rabbit, now just a memory, gave you a momentary surge of strength, but it did nothing to solve the other fundamental problem of your daily consumption: what to drink. You're constantly, naggingly thirsty. The physical labor in the fields, the salty, preserved foods that make up what little variety you have, and the simple need of your body for hydration create a constant demand. But quenching that thirst is one of the most dangerous things you can do. You walk to the communal village well, or more likely to the nearby stream that runs past the edge of your settlement. You lower a wooden bucket into the water. As you pull it up, you try not to look too closely at what's floating in it. The water has a brownish tint and a faint, unpleasant smell. You know exactly why this stream is not a pristine, bubbling brook. It is the village's all-purpose utility channel. Upstream families wash their filthy clothes in it. The village tanner a few hundred yards away scrapes hides and dumps the foul-smelling, chemical-laden wastewater into the current. The local butcher, when there is an animal to be slaughtered, rinses the blood and offal into the same stream. And most significantly, it serves as the de facto sewer for both human and animal waste. The concept of sanitation is utterly alien. Your village has no sewage system. People relieve themselves in cesspits dug near their homes, which frequently overflow during heavy rains, leaching their contents into the ground and eventually into the water table in the stream. Animals wander freely, defecating wherever they please. All of this biological waste teeming with bacteria like E. coli, salmonella, and the microbes that cause cholera and typhoid is concentrated in your only water source. To a modern person, a single cup of this water would be a biological time bomb, a guaranteed trip to the emergency room. For you, it's just water. You know on a gut level that this water is not good. You've seen what happens. People, especially infants and the elderly, are frequently struck down by what you call the flux or dysentery. It's a terrifying illness that causes violent stomach cramps, fever, and a bloody, watery diarrhea that drains the life from a person in a matter of days. You don't understand the germ theory of disease. That's a scientific revolution still centuries away. You attribute it to bad air, an imbalance of your bodily humors, or the wrath of God. But you do make the connection. Drinking too much of the water, especially in the hot summer months, when the stream is low and stagnant, often leads to sickness. So, what is the alternative? The answer is on your table in a large earthenware jug ale, or to be more specific, small ale. This is the ubiquitous drink of your time, consumed by men, women, and even children from morning till night. And here we arrive at a classic mainstream historical fact that is often misunderstood. You don't drink ale primarily to get drunk. You drink it because it is paradoxically safer than the water. The process of making ale involves boiling the water, which unbeknownst to you kills most of the harmful pathogens. The fermentation process, where yeast converts sugars into alcohol, further inhibits the growth of bacteria. The result is a beverage that is far less likely to give you a fatal case of the flux. But let's be clear about what this ale is. It is not the strong, flavorful, hoppy craft beer you might know today. Hops, which act as a preservative and add that characteristic bitter flavor, were not widely used in English brewing until the 15th century. Your ale is an unhopped fermented grain beverage. It's made from barley oats or wheat, and it tastes well. It tastes like fizzy liquid bread. It's cloudy, yeasty, and has a slightly sour tang. The small ale that is your daily drink is the product of a second or even third rinsing of the grain mash, making it very low in alcohol, probably around 1–2%, ABV perhaps even less. It's just alcoholic enough to be safe, but not so strong that you can't drink it all day while working in the fields. A stronger, more flavorful ale would be reserved for holidays and special occasions. The production of this ale is a cornerstone of village life, and it's almost entirely the domain of women. The alewife or brewster was a common figure in every village. She would brew batches of ale in her home, and when it was ready, she would signal that it was for sale by placing a broom or a decorated pole and ale stake over her door. This quirky tidbit is considered by some to be a distant ancestor of the modern pub sign. The quality of ale could vary wildly from one breaster to the next, and a bad batch could be a source of village-wide grumbling. Historians still argue about the true nutritional value of this medieval ale. Some contend it was a vital source of calories and B vitamins, a true liquid bread that helped peasants endure their physically demanding lives. Others argue that its nutritional contribution was minimal, and its primary role was simply that of a safe hydrator. For you, the debate is academic. It is what you have. You start your day with a mug of it. Oh, you carry a flask of it out to the fields and you drink it with your evening meal. It is wet, it is safe, and it provides a dulling caloric comfort that water simply cannot. Your children drink it too. From a young age, they are given watered down small ale instead of the dangerous water from the stream. This practice, while shocking to modern sensibilities, was a logical act of parental care. It was far better for a child to be slightly perpetually sedated by a low alcohol drink than to die of dehydration from dysentery. So you drink your sour, cloudy ale and you're grateful for it. It is one of the few things in your life that you can consume without the fear of immediate violent illness. It is your shield against the invisible poisons lurking in the well. For weeks, the village has been buzzing with a low, hopeful murmur. The Lord's eldest daughter is getting married. For the nobility, this means a flurry of political negotiation, doughy arrangements, and the commissioning of fine new clothes. For you, it means something far more important, a feast. Not a feast for you in the manor house, of course, that is a world away. But a celebration of this magnitude always has a ripple effect. The Lord, in a gesture of magnanimity, and to ensure his peasants are healthy enough to work his lands and pray for his new son-in-law, will grant a boon. And that boon, you pray, will involve meat. The day arrives, a welcome break from the relentless toil in the fields. The air itself feels different, charged with a rare sense of occasion. And then you see it, a cart rumbling from the direction of the manor house carrying the Lord's gift. It's not the prime cuts, of course, the tenderloins, the plump legs of mutton, the choice ribs of beef. Those are all destined for the hay table to be roasted and drenched in expensive sauces. What the cart carries is for you. It is the offal. The entrails, the organs, the bits of the animal that the noble kitchen deems unworthy. To the squeamish modern palate, this might sound like a punishment, not a gift. But to you, weak from a diet of pottage and gritty bread, this is a treasure trove of fat and protein. Your eyes scan the pile of bloody, steaming innards. You see the heart, the liver, the kidneys, the lungs. You see the stomach and the long coiled ropes of intestine. There might even be a severed head or a pile of trotters. This is not a sight that disgusts you. It is a sight that makes your mouth water with a primal, desperate hunger. A crowd gathers in the Lord's Reeve, a stern man who is usually yelling at you about your plowing oversees the distribution. There is no polite queuing. It is a tense, jostling affair. Everyone trying to get the best pieces. You manage to secure a glistening dark red liver and a section of the small intestine. You clutch them to your chest, a prize of unimaginable value, and hurry back to your hut before anyone can try to snatch them away. Now comes the challenge of preparation. This is not a simple matter of frying up some liver and onions. The hygiene standards of your kitchen, which is to say the corner of your single room with the smoky fire, are non existent. But even by those standards, awful requires care. The mainstream historical fact is that these parts of the animal spoil incredibly quickly. They must be cooked and eaten almost immediately, especially in the absence of any refrigeration. The liver already has a faint metallic smell, and the intestines require a thorough, disgusting cleaning. You take the intestines to the stream, the same contaminated stream you avoid drinking from, and begin the process of flushing them out. You squeeze the semi-digested contents from the long tube, a foul-smelling greenish paste. You rinse it again and again, the cold, dirty water flowing through the casing. This process is crucial. If not cleaned properly, the final dish will have a distinctly veal taste. It's a grim stomach-turning job, but you do it with the focus of a surgeon. Once cleaned, the intestines can be used in a few ways. They can be braided and fried until crisp dish you might call chitterlings, or more likely, they can be used as sausage casings. You don't have much to stuff them with, but you can chop up the other tougher bits of organ meat, perhaps the lungs or parts of the stomach. Mix them with some of your precious oat grit and a few wild herbs and stuff. The mixture into the intestinal casing. It's a primitive form of sausage, a way to make the less palatable parts more appealing and stretch the meat further. Historians often call this type of dish a humble pie, which originally referred to a pie made from the umbels, the edible entrails of a deer. The liver is easier. You slice it and cook it directly over the fire on a hot stone, or perhaps impaled on a stick. The smell fills your small hut, a rich irony, intoxicating aroma that is the absolute antithesis of your usual pottage fumes. It is the smell of life, of strength, of a full belly. As it sizzles, fat drips into the fire, spitting and releasing more of that glorious scent. It feels like a holy ritual. The family gathers around the fire, our eyes wide fixed on the cooking meat. There are no plates to speak of. The cooked liver is divided up and handed out on thick crusts of your hard stale bread. A plate you can eat, known as a trencher. You take your first bite. The texture is dense, almost creamy. The flavor is overwhelmingly strong, rich, and bloody. After a diet of unseasoned gyre, the intensity of it is a shock to your system. It is the most delicious thing you have ever tasted. You eat slowly, savoring every morsel, knowing that this experience might not come again for many months or even a year. There's a quirky and slightly stomach-turning tidbit about awful consumption, the sheer variety of what was considered edible. Recipes from the period, even for the poor, mention using the spleen, the pancreas, the brain, and even the testicles of animals. Nothing was wasted. The head of a boar or a sheep would be boiled for hours to make a gelatinous broth, and the meat would be picked from the skull. This was nose-to-tail eating, born not of culinary fashion, but of brutal necessity. As you finish your portion, licking the last of the fatty juices from your fingers, a deep, satisfying warmth spreads through you. It's a feeling you haven't felt in a long time. It's not just the fullness in your belly, it's the feeling of protein and fat replenishing your depleted body. For one night, you are not just surviving, you're feasting, and the fact that you are eating the Lord's garbage doesn't diminish the feeling one bit. The memory of the awful feast fades and your diet returns to its grim baseline. The main staple day in and day out is bread, but not the relatively safe if gritty Maslin bread made from wheat and rye. In your particular region, the soil is poor and the climate is harsh, which means the dominant crop is rye. It's a hardy, resilient grain that can grow where others fail. And so your daily bread is a dense, dark, almost black loaf made entirely from rye flour. It has a strong, sour flavor that you've come to associate with the very taste of sustenance itself. But this humble rye bread carries a hidden, terrifying danger, a microscopic stowaway that can unleash hell on your village. It begins subtly. A neighbor, a man you've known your whole life, starts to complain of a strange tingling in his fingers and toes. He dismisses it as the cold, but it persists, growing into a burning sensation, a feeling he describes as fire running through his veins. Then his wife and children start to feel it too. Within a week, the whole family is afflicted. They writhe in their beds, screaming in agony from the fiery pain. This is the first stage of a horrifying affliction known to medieval people as igneous saca, the holy fire. Today we know it as ergotism. This is a mainstream historical fact of medieval life that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. Ergot is a fungus clavic purpuree that grows on rye and other cereals, especially after a cold winter followed by a wet spring. The exact conditions you've just had. The fungus forms a hard, purplish black sclerotium, which looks like a large, dark grain of rye or a mouse dropping. When the rye is harvested, these ergots are often harvested along with it. In your small-scale, non-industrial farming, there's no technology to sift them out. They are simply milled along with the healthy grain, poisoning the entire batch of flour. The bread you've been eating every day is laced with a powerful, toxic cocktail of alkaloids. You watch your neighbor's family, and a chilling fear spreads through the village. The burning pain is just the beginning. The toxins in the ergot constrict the blood vessels, cutting off circulation to the extremities. Your neighbor's hands and feet begin to swell, turn purple, then black. The tissue dies. It becomes dry, mummified, and gangrenous. The affected limbs, starved of blood, become numb, and then horrifyingly can break off with the slightest touch, with no pain and no loss of blood. This form of the disease is known as gangrenous erotism. You see your neighbor, a once strong man, lose his fingers, then his hands, then his feet, while suffering from the internal fiery torment. But there is another form of the disease, one that is perhaps even more frightening. In another hut, a different family who ate from the same batch of poisoned bread is experiencing something else entirely. They are not screaming from pain, but from terror. They are having powerful, vivid hallucinations. They see demons in the corners of their smoke-filled room. They speak of monstrous beasts crawling on their skin. They are racked with convulsions, their bodies contorting in violent spasms. This is convulsive erotism caused by a different combination of alkaloids in the fungus. The victims suffer from muscle twitches, bizarre postures, and severe mental disturbances, including psychosis and mania. The village priest is summoned. He sees the blackening limbs and hears the ravings about demons, and he comes to the only conclusion his worldview allows. It is a divine punishment. He calls it Saint Anoni's fire, named after the Christian hermit Saint Anthony, whose intervention was sought for sufferers. Pilgrimages were made to shrines containing his relics. And there's a quirky and rather logical reason why this sometimes worked. The journey to the shrine meant leaving home and leaving behind the source of the poison, the contaminated bread. Once at the shrine, the pilgrims would be fed by the monks, usually with wheat bread, which is not susceptible to ergot. Their symptoms would miraculously disappear, reinforcing the belief in the saint's healing power. It was a medical solution masquerading as a miracle. Historians still argue about the prevalence of ergotism and whether it can be linked to specific historical events. Some have controversially suggested that the bizarre behavior and accusations of the Salem witch trials in the 1690s might have been triggered by an outbreak of convulsive ergotism in a rye-eating community. While this theory is heavily debated, it highlights the profound and terrifying effects this fungus could have on a community. It could literally make people believe they were surrounded by witchcraft. You live in a state of constant anxiety. Is the loaf of bread on your table safe? You inspect it, looking for the telltale dark kernels of the ergot, but they are milled into the flour invisible. You eat your daily portion with a sense of dread. Every itch, every twinge in your fingers sends a jolt of panic through you. Is it starting? Is the fire beginning to burn in your veins? The very food that is meant to sustain you has become a potential source of unimaginable suffering, madness, and mutilation. It is the ultimate betrayal. The staff of life has become a poison chalice, and you have no choice but to keep drinking from it, praying that this time it won't be your family that falls to the fire. The fear of St. Anoni's fire eventually subsides as a new clean harvest of rye comes in. But the passing of one horror only brings the return of a more mundane, yet relentless assault on your senses. Autumn has arrived, and with it the season of slaughter. The few pigs you are allowed to keep fattened over the summer on scraps and forage must now be killed before the lean winter months make feeding them impossible. You have a momentary influx of fresh meat, a rare and joyous luxury, but you know it will not last. Your overwhelming priority is not flavor or texture, it is preservation. And in your world, preservation means one thing above all else: salt. You have no freezers, no canning jars, no vacuum sealers. You have salt. But again, you must abandon your modern conception of this mineral. The salt you know is a fine white iodized powder that flows freely from a shaker. The salt you have is a coarse, grayish, chunky substance harvested from coastal salt pans or mined from the earth. It is full of impurities, bits of grit, clay, and other minerals that give it a harsh, often bitter taste. It's a crude, powerful tool, and you are about to use it with brutal inefficiency. The process is called salt curing or corning, from the Old English word corn, which referred to any small hard particle like a grain of wheat or a crystal of salt. You take the fresh cuts of pork, the hams, the bacon, the shoulders, and you dredge them in a thick layer of this coarse, gritty salt. You rub it into every crevice, forcing it deep into the flesh. The salt draws out the moisture from the meat, and it's this dehydration that makes it inhospitable to the bacteria that cause spoilage. Once thoroughly coated, the meat is packed into a barrel with more layers of salt poured in between each piece until the entire container is full. There it will sit for weeks or months, slowly transforming from fresh meat into a preserved rock-hard slab of salt pork. This is a mainstream historical fact that dictated the flavor profile of an entire era. For most of the year, for most people, any meat or fish you ate was not fresh. It was heavily, aggressively salted. This was true for the peasant eating his salt pork and for the sailor on a long voyage gnawing on salt beef. The sheer quantity of salt used was staggering. The goal wasn't to enhance the flavor, it was to wage all-out war on decay. The result was a product that was often more salt than meat. Months later, in the dead of winter, you pry a piece of pork from the barrel. It is stiff, hard, and encrusted with salt crystals. It is also a depressing grayish-brown color. Before you can even think about eating it, you must try to make it palatable. The first step is to soak it for hours or even days in several changes of water. You place the slab of meat in a bucket of precious water, the same contaminated water you use for everything else, hoping to draw out some of the overwhelming saltiness. The water quickly becomes a cloudy, briny soup. You change it again and again, but you can never get it all out. After a lengthy soaking, the meat is still incredibly salty. You chop a piece off and add it to the perpetual pottage pot. This is its primary function in your diet. A small piece of salt pork simmering in the pot for hours will release some of its flavor and fat into the grarel. The pottage, usually a monument to blandness, will suddenly have a greasy, smoky, and intensely saline character. It's a welcome change, but it's a sledgehammer of a flavor, not a delicate seasoning. The small morsels of meat you find in your bowl are tough, chewy, and still so salty they make your tongue tingle and your eyes water. The same process applies to fish. Herring and cod, caught in vast quantities in the North Sea, were the other great protein staples of the age. They were gutted, beheaded, and layered in barrels, with salt becoming the ubiquitous salt cod or stockfish. This preserved fish was a major item of trade throughout Europe. It was food for armies, for sailors, and for inland communities like yours, especially on the many meatless days mandated by the church. Like the salt pork, it was hard as a board and inedibly salty. It required a long, tedious process of soaking and often beating with a mallet to soften it before it could be cooked. The resulting dish was flaky, chewy, and you guessed it, overwhelmingly of salt. There's a quirky tidbit related to the salt trade that reveals its immense importance. Salt was so valuable that it was controlled by governments and monopolies. The infamous French salt tax, the gabel, was one of the most hated taxes in French history and a contributing factor to the French Revolution centuries later. In your time, access to cheap, reliable salt is a matter of life and death. Historians still argue about the full health implications of such a high sodium diet. While it effectively preserved food, it likely contributed to a host of health problems like high blood pressure and heart disease, though these would have been masked by the much more immediate threats of starvation and infectious disease. Your palate, your very sense of taste, has been bludgeoned into submission by salt. You don't know delicate flavors. You know bland pottage, sour bread, and the chemical burn of sodium chloride. Every meal is a monotonous, briny chore. The joy of the fresh autumn slaughter has been transformed into the grim duty of consuming its desiccated salts, saturated ghost. The salt preserves the meat, yes, but in doing so it kills everything that once made it joyful to eat. It is the taste of survival, and it is a harsh and unforgiving flavor. The salt barrel is your primary weapon against the relentless march of decay, but it is not your only one. You are locked in a constant, desperate race against rot, and you must employ every trick you know to keep your meager food stores from turning into a putrid, inedible sludge. Your one-room hut is not just a home. It is a food preservation laboratory, albeit a filthy and inefficient one. The stakes are absolute. Every morsel of food that succumbs to mold pests or bacteria is a piece of your own life force lost forever. High up in the smoky rafters of your hut, hanging far above the fire, are the other pieces of the autumn pig slaughter. These are the cuts destined for a different kind of preservation smoking. After a brief curing in salt, not as intense as the barrel cure, but enough to begin the process, you hang the sides of bacon and the hams from the dark soot-covered beams of your ceiling. The ever-present smoke from your central hearth, which stings your eyes and blackens the walls, now serves a vital secondary purpose. This is not the delicate, controlled, cold smoking of a modern artisan. This is a crude, constant, and chaotic process. The smoke from your fire, fueled by damp wood, peat, or whatever combustible material you can find, is thick and full of impurities. Over weeks and months, this acrid smoke will slowly permeate the meat. The chemicals in the smoke, phenols, aldehydes and acids and natural preservatives, they slow the growth of bacteria and prevent the fat from going rancid. The process also slowly dehydrates the meat, creating a hard, protective outer layer known as a pele. The result is a piece of bacon that is less a culinary delight and more a testament to endurance. When you finally take it down, it is blackened hard and covered in a layer of greasy soot. It smells overwhelmingly of wood smoke with a sour chemical tang. The flavor is intense, pungent, and frankly, a bit like licking an ashtray. To prepare it, you have to scrape off the outer layer of soot and grime, then boil it for a long time to soften it and leach out some of the harshness. Like the salt pork, its primary role is to be a flavoring agent for the pottage pot, lending its powerful smoky essence to the bland grill. Drying is another crucial technique. In the late summer and autumn, when you have a temporary surplus of anything, you try to dry it. You spread wild mushrooms out on a piece of cloth near the fire. You string up apples if you're lucky enough to have access to an apple tree, creating long garlands of fruit that slowly wrinkle and harden. You do the same with herbs gathered from the edge of the woods. Most importantly, you dry peas and beans. After the harvest, you shell them and lay them out on any available surface, turning them every day until they are as hard and dry as little stones. These dried legumes are your winter protein, the backbone of your pottage when all the meat is gone. This is a mainstream historical fact. Drying is one of the oldest food preservation methods known to humanity. It's simple, effective, and requires no special equipment, but it is a slow, anxious process. A sudden turn in the weather, a week of damp, rainy days can ruin everything. This is when the true enemy appears: mold. You watch your precious food stores like a hawk, looking for the first fuzzy spots of green, white, or black. Mold is a disaster. It can spread with the terrifying speed, rendering a whole batch of dried peas or a side of bacon inedible. Some molds are harmless, but others produce mycotoxins, dangerous poisons that can cause severe illness or death. You don't know the difference. To you, all mold is a sign of failure, a victory for the forces of decay. Historians still argue about how medieval people dealt with food that was on the turn. Did they throw it away, or did they simply cut off the bad bits and eat the rest? The scholarly consensus leans towards the latter. You cannot afford to waste a single calorie. If a piece of your smoked bacon has a patch of mold, you will scrape it off vigorously. If your bread is stale and sprouting a bit of green, you will cut away the visible mold, toast the rest over the fire to kill what you can't see and dunk it in your pottage. You're engaged in a constant, risky negotiation with spoilage. You eat food that a modern person would classify as hazardous waste, and you pray that your constitution is strong enough to handle it. And then there are the pests. Your hut is a shared living space. Mice and rats are a constant presence. Bold and fearless, they can chew through a cloth sack in a single night, feasting on your grain and befalling what they don't eat with their dropping. You try to store your grain in earthenware pots with heavy lids, but the pests are relentless. Insects are even worse. Weevils infest the flour, leaving it full of tiny holes and squirming larvae. You try to sift them out, but you never get them all. It's a source of what some anthropologists cheekily call accidental protein. This quirky and disgusting tidbit that medieval people regularly and unknowingly consumed a significant amount of insect matter is almost certainly true. You are not winning the race against rot. You are at best fighting it to a desperate standstill. Every day is a battle. You check the salt barrel, sniff the hanging bacon, inspect the dried peas. You're a curator of a museum of decay, a reluctant expert in the subtle signs of spoilage. Your senses are finely tuned to the smell of rancid fat, the sight of fuzzy mold, the taste of encroaching sourness. It is a stressful, thankless, and never-ending job. And it is a job you must do. Because in a world without refrigeration, nature's relentless effort to reclaim your food is a constant and immediate threat to your survival. The harvest is done, your small strip of land has yielded its meager bounty, a few sacks of coarse mixed grain. It's not much, but it's the fruit of a year's labor, the key to your survival through the coming winter. But it's not yet food, it's just hard, inedible kernels. To turn it into the flour that will become your gritty bread and the grows that will thicken your pottage, you must take it to be milled. And this means you must face one of the most feared and despised figures in your village, the miller. You load the heavy sacks onto your cart, or perhaps just hoist one onto your back for the trudge to the watermill on the river. The mill, like the communal oven, is a monopoly owned by the lord of the manor. This is another of those feudal obligations known as a banality. You are legally forbidden from milling your own grain at home with a hand warn. All grain grown on the manor must be processed at the lord's mill, and the miller is his appointed agent. This gives him immense power over you, and it is a power he is known to abuse. The stereotype of the greedy, thieving miller is a powerful and persistent one in medieval literature. Chaucer, in his Canterbury Tales, paints a classic portrait of the miller as a broy, cheating, foul-mouthed brute with a thumb of gold. This mainstream historical trope wasn't just a literary invention. It reflected a genuine and widespread peasant grievance. The miller was the middleman who stood between your hard work and your daily bread, and he had 100 ways to steal from you. As you arrive at the mill, you are greeted by the thunderous noise of the water he turning the massive millstones. The air is thick with a fine choking dust that coats everything in a pale film. The miller emerges from the gloom, a stout man, perpetually covered in a dusting of white flour that seems to accent his sneer. You state your business, and he hefts your sacks, judging their weight with a practiced air of condescension. His fee, known as multure, is paid in kind. He's entitled to take a certain portion of your grain as payment for milling the rest. The amount was often fixed by law, perhaps one of the total, but it was trivially easy for him to take more. You watch with a hawk's eye as he measures out his portion, but his hands are quick and deceptive. He might use a rigged measure, one with a false bottom. He might scoop with a sweeping, generous motion when taking his share, and a stingy, flat motion when measuring yours. His most famous trick, the one that gave rise to the proverb about a miller's thumb of gold, involved pressing his thumb down on the scales when weighing the grain, or the flour, artificially increasing the weight and thus his share. An honest miller's thumb would be whitened by flour, but a thieving one by pressing it down and taking more than his share was said to make as valuable as gold. Once the toll is taken, your grain is poured into the hopper which feeds it into the space between the two great grooved millstones. The top runner stone turns, while the bottom bedstone is stationary. The grain is crushed and ground between them, emerging from the sides as a coarse warm meal. This is where the second layer of deception begins. The miller could have hidden pipes or chutes that divert a small, steady stream of your flour into a hidden bag. A little from you, a little from the next man. By the end of the day, Dad's up to a tidy stolen profit, but stealing your flour is only half of it. He's also notorious for adulterating what he gives back to you. Remember the sand and sawdust in your bread. The miller is often the primary culprit. He might sweep the filthy floor of the mill, gathering up flour dust, chaff, dirt, and literal sawdust, and mix this into the flour he returns to you. He might add cheap fillers like ground chalk or dried bean meal to make up the weight he has stolen. You receive a sack of flour that feels heavy enough, but its nutritional value has been compromised. It will produce a smaller, less nourishing loaf, and it will contribute to the wearing down of your family's teeth. There's a quirky and rather dark folklore tidbit about millers. They were often associated with sorcery and the devil. The mill itself was a mysterious, powerful, and dangerous place. It was often located at the edge of the village on the river, a place between the cultivated and the wild. The miller controlled this immense, thunderous technology that transformed one substance into another, almost like an alchemist. His ability to seemingly conjure profit from thin air, combined with his reputation for theft, made people suspicious. Stories abounded of millers who had made pacts with dark forces to ensure their mills always ran and their profits were always high. Historians still argue whether the miller's reputation was universally deserved or if he was simply a convenient scapegoat for the peasants' frustrations with the oppressive feudal system. After all, the miller was just an agent of the Lord, and the entire system was designed to extract wealth from your labor. However, the sheer volume of complaints, court cases, and satirical depictions suggests that the problem was very real and very widespread. The miller was the public face of an exploitation you felt every single day. You take your sack of freshly meal and likely compromised flour. You have no choice but to pay his price and accept what he gives you. To accuse him of cheating is to risk being banned from the mill, which would be a death sentence. Or to earn a beating from a man who spends all day wrestling heavy sacks of grain. You shoulder the sack, the precious, dusty weight of it, a cold comfort. You have survived the encounter, but you know you have been cheated. The bread you make from this flour will be a little grittier, a little less wholesome. The miller's greedy thumb has left its invisible golden imprint on every meal you will eat for the next several months. You return from the mill with your sack of adulterated flour. The dusty proof of the miller's theft slung over your shoulder. You step back into your hut, and the contrast between the world of semi-industrial processing and your domestic reality is stark. Your home, the place where your food will be transformed from raw ingredients into meals, is a petri dish of filth. The modern concept of kitchen hygiene is so far in your future as to be an alien dimension. Your cooking space is not a separate room. It is a corner of the single smoke-filled space where you eat, sleep, and live. The floor, as you know, is packed earth. It's uneven, perpetually damp, and impossible to truly clean. You might sweep it occasionally with a rough broom made of twigs, but this only stirs up the dust, dirt, and dried animal droppings. Spilled food grease from the pottage pot and stray bits of vegetable waste simply get trodden into the floor, becoming part of its permanent grimy composition. This floor is the stage upon which your food preparation takes place. Your primary work surface is a rough, wobbly table made from a few planks of wood laid across trestles. It is a multi-purpose piece of furniture. It is where you knead your dough, chop your vegetables, and serve your meals. It is also where you might mend a tool, swaddle a baby, or sit and delouse your children's hair. The board is never scrubbed with soap and hot water. You have no soap, and hot water is a precious commodity that requires burning your limited firewood. At best, you might scrape it down with your all-purpose knife or wipe it with a damp and likely filthy rag. The deep cracks and grooves in the wood are packed with the residue of 100 previous meals, a thriving ecosystem of bacteria. And you're not alone in this space. This is a mainstream historical fact that is hard for the modern mind to grasp. The line between human and animal living quarters was blurry at best. It was common practice, especially during the cold winter months, to bring your most valuable livestock inside at night. Your single chicken, a precious source of the occasional egg, might peck around on the floor. The family pig, if you're fortunate enough to have one, might be tethered in a corner, snuffling and defecating just a few feet from where your food is prepared. This was a practical measure to prevent theft and protect the animals from the cold. But the sanitary implications are staggering. Animal dander, feces, and the pests they carry, fleas, lice, and ticks, are an integral part of your home's atmosphere. The air itself is a thick soup of contaminants. The smoke from the open hearth, while useful for smoking meat and deterring some insects, fills the room with carcinogenic soot that settles on every surface. There is no ventilation to speak of, so the air is stagnant, thick with the smells of smoke, unwashed bodies, animal waste, and cooking pottage. In the summer, flies are a constant buzzing torment. They land on the pile of vegetable scraps in the corner, on the sleeping dog, on the face of your baby, and on the bread dough you are kneading. You shoo them away, but it's a futile gesture. They are simply part of the landscape. Let's watch you make a loaf of your sad, gritty bread. You pour the miller's flour into a wooden trough. You add water that you've carried in a bucket from the contaminated stream. You use a sourdough starter, a living culture of yeast and bacteria that you keep in a crock. This starter or leaven is a quirky and fascinating bit of history. It's a piece of dough saved from the last batch, a continuous living link to every loaf of bread you've ever made. Some families might have had starters that were in theory generations old. While romantic, this also meant that any bad bacteria that got into the starter were propagated indefinitely. You knead the dough on your multi-purpose table, your unwashed hands working the gritty flour. A chicken wanders past pecking at a stray bit of dough that falls to the floor. You chew it away. The baby cries and you pause to comfort it before returning to your kneading without washing your hands. The finished dough is left to rise in the same wooden trough, perhaps covered with the same multi-purpose cloth you use for everything else. You're not thinking about cross-contamination or germ theory. You're thinking about getting the bread made before you have to go out and work the fields. Historians still argue about the true impact of this lack of hygiene on daily health. Some argue that medieval people must have developed incredibly robust immune systems from this constant low-level exposure to pathogens from birth. Their bodies were a battleground, and their immune systems were seasoned veterans. Others contend that this filth was a primary contributor to the staggeringly high rates of infant mortality and the low average life expectancy. A simple stomach bug contracted from a contaminated bit of food could easily be fatal for the very young or the elderly. The truth is likely a combination of both. You are tougher than a modern human, but you are also much more likely to die from something that a simple bar of soap could have prevented. Finally, consider your cooking utensils. You have one great iron cauldron for pottage. You might have a skillet or a griddle for cooking over the fire. You have a few wooden spoons and bowls. These are not scrubbed clean after each use. They are at best wiped out or swished in a bucket of cold water. The porous wood of the spoons and bowls absorbs the flavors, fats, and bacteria of every meal, becoming permanently stained and greasy. Your all-purpose knife used for cutting food, mending leather, and cleaning your nails is wiped on your trousers between tasks. This is the reality of your kitchen. It is a place not of culinary art, but of desperate, dirty survival. The food you produce here is a testament not to your skill, but to the sheer resilience of the human stomach. The air grows crisp and the leaves have turned from green to a blaze of golden rust. For you, this signals the arrival of one of the most stressful, bloody, and vital events of the peasant calendar, the annual autumn slaughter. This is the time typically around Martmas in November, when livestock that cannot be affordably fed through the lean winter months must be killed. It's a period of intense frantic activity, a sudden temporary deluge of fresh meat that must be processed with terrifying speed before it spoils. Your family's pig, which you may have brought inside the hut on cold nights and fattened all summer on scraps, is now a marked animal. It represents your single largest asset, a walking ladder of fat and protein. There is no sentimentality in this. The pig is not a pet. It is a crucial investment, and this time has come to cash it in. The entire village is engaged in the same grisly task. The usual quiet rhythm of agricultural life is broken by the squealing of pigs and the lowing of the occasional cow, sounds that are abruptly silenced. The process of butchering is a communal, messy affair. It happens right outside your hut in the muddy yard you share with your neighbors. There is no sterile abattoir, no humane stun gun. The pig is wrestled into position by several men, its terrified squeals echoing through the village. The killing itself is done with a long, sharp knife. The sticker, a man with a steady hand and a strong stomach, plunges the knife deep into the pig's throat, severing the corroded artery. It is a violent, visceral act. What follows is the most important part, collecting the blood. A woman, perhaps your wife or mother, holds a bucket or a pan directly under the gushing wound. Not a single drop of this precious iron-rich liquid can be wasted. The blood is immediately stirred to prevent it from coagulating. It will be the primary ingredient for black pudding or blood sausage. Mixed with oat gross, suet animal fat, and perhaps a few herbs, it will be stuffed into cleaned intestines and boiled. This is a mainstream historical food that stretches back millennia. A highly efficient way of preserving the most perishable part of the animal and turning it into a calorie-dense, nutritious food. Once the pig is bled out, the work is just beginning. The carcass is laid on a trestle or hung from a tree. The next step is to remove the hair. This is done by dousing the pig with buckets of scalding hot water and then scraping the skin vigorously with bell-shaped tools or knives. The hot water loosens the bristles and they are scraped off in clumps, leaving the skin smooth and pale. The smell of wet, hot pig hair is pungent and unforgettable. Then comes the evisceration. The pig's belly is slit open from throat to tail, and the steamy mass of internal organs is carefully removed. This is a delicate operation. If you accidentally puncture the intestines or the bladder, their contents can spill out and taint the meat. A minor disaster. The organs are immediately sorted. The liver, heart, and kidneys, the pluck, are set aside for immediate consumption, a rare and welcome feast. The intestines are handed over to the women to begin the laborious process of cleaning them for use as sausage casings. The stomach is emptied and cleaned to be used for dishes like haggis or as a container itself. The head and trotters are set aside to be boiled for brawn or jellied stock. This is the core principle of your butchering. Nothing is wasted. This isn't a trendy culinary philosophy. It is absolute non-negotiable economic reality. Every single part of the animal, from its snout to its tail, from its blood to its bones, has a use. The fat will be rendered down into lard for cooking and preserving. The bones will be boiled for days to extract every last bit of gelatin and flavor for the pottage pot. Even the bladder can be cleaned, inflated, and used as a makeshift balloon for the children, or as a waterproof pouch. There is a quirky and rather gruesome tidbit about the sheer resourcefulness of this process. The use of every last scrap, tiny bits of meat clinging to the skeleton after the main cuts were removed, would be scraped off and minced to become meatballs. The skin, after being scraped of its hair, could be frayed into a crispy snack, an early version of pork rind. You are a master of deconstruction, driven by a fear of waste that is bone deep. The pressure is immense. You're racing against time and bacteria. The fresh meat and organs must be processed immediately. The cuts destined for salting must be rubbed and packed into the barrel. The pieces to be smoked must be hung in the rafters. The blood must be turned into pudding. The whole village becomes a frantic, coordinated production line of slaughter, gutting, cleaning, chopping, salting, and boiling. The work goes on from dawn until well after dusk by the flickering light of the fire. The ground becomes a muddy, bloody mess. The air is thick with the coppery smell of blood, the stench of scalded hair, and the rich aroma of the first fresh meat cooking over the fire. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of this annual ritual. Did the routine nature of the slaughter desensitize people to violence and death, making them tougher and more resilient, or was it a source of underlying stress and trauma? The yearly immersion in gore and death that left a subtle scar for you in this moment. There is no time for reflection. You are covered in blood and grease. Your muscles ache, and your mind is focused on a single overwhelming task: to dismantle this animal and secure your family's food for the winter. It is a grim, bloody, and absolutely necessary day's work. The frenzy of the autumn slaughter is over. The salt barrel is full. The newly made blood sausages have been eaten, and the hams are slowly blackening in the smoky rafters. You have, for the moment, a sense of security, but meat is not the only animal product you rely on. The other great pillar of your limited diet comes from the cow, or the few goats you might keep on the village common: dairy. But once again, you must completely erase any modern ideas of what dairy means. Your experience with it is a constant struggle against souring separation and rancidity. Milk in its fresh liquid form is a rare and fleeting luxury. You have no refrigeration. A bucket of milk drawn from the cow in the morning will begin to turn by evening, especially in the warmer months. Its natural bacteria combined with whatever contaminants were introduced from the cow's udder. The milker's unwashed hands or the dirty wooden bucket will immediately begin to multiply. The milk will sour, developing a tangy, acidic flavor and a curdled texture. For you, fresh sweet milk is a treat reserved for the very young, the very old, or the sick, and it must be consumed within hours of leaving the cow. This is a mainstream historical fact. For most of medieval Europe, milk was not primarily a beverage for adults. It was a raw material, the starting point for products with a longer shelf life. The vast majority of milk produced was immediately processed into butter and cheese, the only viable ways to store its precious fat and protein. The process of making butter is your first line of defense. After milking, the milk is left to stand in a shallow pan for a day, allowing the cream to rise to the top. You skim this cream off carefully. The remaining liquid is thin, watery, and low in fat. This is buttermilk, or more accurately, skim milk. You don't throw it away. Nothing's wasted. You drink it, or more likely, you use it as the liquid base for your pottage, adding a slight sour tang and a bit of protein. Sometimes it's used to make a very simple sour cheese. The cream is poured into an earthenware churn. You then begin the laborious process of churning, agitating the cream with a wooden plunger or dasher for what feels like an eternity. It's a physically demanding job, often performed by the women of the household. After a long time, a magical transformation occurs. The fat globules in the cream begin to clump together, separating from the liquid. You gather these golden, waxy clumps. This is your butter. The liquid left behind is the true buttermilk, a sour, refreshing drink that is another small bonus of the process. But this butter is not the sweet, creamy, pale yellow product. You know it is often a deep yellow or almost orange, a result of the beta carotene in the grass the cows eat, and it is incredibly perishable. To preserve it, you must salt it heavily, mixing in coarse, gritty salt. This salty, often slightly tangy butter is then packed into earthenware pots or wooden firkins. It will keep for a while, but it is in a constant battle with rancidity. The fat molecules will slowly oxidize, developing a foul, pungent smell and a sharp, acrid taste. You're well acquainted with the taste of slightly off butter. Unless you are eating it within a few days of churning, certain level of rancidity is just part of the flavor profile. Cheese is the other major product, the ultimate way to concentrate and preserve milk. The process is a form of controlled spoilage. You gently heat a pot of milk over the fire and add a coagulant. You don't have commercially produced Renee. A quirky but common historical method was to use a piece of a calf's or lamb's stomach, which naturally contains the enzyme or various plant extracts like nettle or thistle. This causes the milk to separate into solid curds in liquid whey. The whey, a watery greenish liquid, is drained off. It's full of protein and nutrients. So of course it is not discarded. It is a common drink for the poorest of the poor, and it can also be used to boil the pottage or fed to the pigs. The curds are the beginning of your cheese. For a simple fresh cheese, you might just press them in a cloth bag, squeezing out the excess whey, and eat it within a day or two. It's soft, crumbly, and very sour. But to create a cheese that will last the winter, you need to remove as much moisture as possible. The curds are salted, broken up, and packed tightly into a wooden mold. Then a heavy stone is placed on top, pressing the curds for days, squeezing out every last drop of whey. The resulting wheel of cheese is dense, hard, and dry. It is then taken to a cool, dark place to age. This aging process develops flavor, but it also invites other organisms. The cheese will grow a rind of mold, which you will either scrape off or learn to live with. It will be nibbled at by cheese mites, tiny arachnids that create a fine gray dust on the surface. The final product of the cheese you eat in the depths of winter is a rock-hard, intensely flavored, and incredibly salty substance. It's so hard you often need a special tool or even a small hatchet to break off a piece. It's not a cheese for delicate slicing. You would normally it sharp, pungent flavor and explosion in your mouth. Or you might grate some of it into your pottage to add a savory depth. Historians still argue about the diversity of peasant cheeses. But the defining characteristics were almost certainly hardness, saltiness, and a powerful, often barnyard aroma that would be considered a major fault in most modern cheesem. Your relationship with dairy is one of constant management and compromise. It is a race to transform a perishable liquid into a stable solid. You are a master of curdling, churning, and pressing, not out of craft, but out of necessity. The flavors you associate with milk products are not sweet and fresh, but sour, salty, and pungent. They are the flavors of a food that has been pulled back from the brink of decay, a testament to your daily desperate ingenuity. You've endured the hungry gap. You have survived the filth of your kitchen, the cheating of the miller, and the relentless assault of salt on your palate. You have learned to live with a baseline of hunger, a constant low-level ache that is as familiar as the smoky air in your hut. But you're about to face a new level of hell. The year is 1315 and the weather has turned against you in a way that is not just unfortunate, but apocalyptic. It begins with the rain, not just a wet spring, but a deluge. It starts in May and it does not stop. Day after day, a cold, relentless rain soaks the fields, turning your small strips of land into a quagmire of mud. The seeds you so carefully planted rot in the ground before they can sprout. The hay you need to feed your animals for the winter is flattened and turns black with mold in the fields. The sun, it seems, has abandoned the world. This is the beginning of the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, a mainstream historical event that was one of the worst subsistence crises in European history. It was a continent-wide catastrophe triggered by a period of severe climate change, known as the Little Ice Age. For you, it is not a historical event. It is the end of the world. The harvest of 1315 is a complete failure. You manage to gather a fraction of your usual yield, and what you do gather is damp and of poor quality, prone to rot and fungus, including the dreaded ergot. The price of grain skyrockets to levels never before seen. The meager savings you might have had are wiped out in a week buying a small amount of flour that will not last. The Lord's granaries are sealed tight, reserved for his own household. There is no relief coming. By the winter of 1315, the situation is desperate. The perpetually simmering pottage pot is now just a pot of brownish water, flavored with a single moldy turnip. The bread is gone. The salted meat from last year's slaughter is gone. You've already stripped the woods of every edible root, leaf, and berry. You've eaten the nettles, the dandelions, the bark from the trees. You've ground acorns into a bitter, indigestible flour. The village falls silent, the silence of profound communal starvation. You watch as your neighbors begin to eat the seed grain they had stored for next year's planting. It is an act of ultimate despair, a choice to survive today by sacrificing any hope for tomorrow. You do the same. You eat the seeds. The gnawing hunger is so all-consuming that it obliterates all other thoughts. People become gaunt, skeletal figures, their eyes hollow, their movements slow and weak. The very young and the very old are the first to go, or the village death toll begins to climb. Every morning you see another body being harried to the churchyard for a hasty, shallow burial. The social order begins to break down. Glory and morality luxuries of a full belly evaporate. People will do anything for a mouthful of food. There are stories from the nearby town of the poor eating the bodies of executed criminals hanging from the gallows. The bonds of community dissolve, replaced by a terrible animalistic suspicion. Your neighbor is no longer a friend. He is a competitor for a stray root, a potential thief of the last scrap of food you have hidden. And then the unthinkable begins to happen. It starts with rumors, whispered stories from other villages, so horrific you refuse to believe them. Stories of travelers disappearing on the road, stories of children who wander off and are never seen again. This is the final, most terrible taboo, the last resort of a starving population: cannibalism. Historians still argue about how widespread cannibalism truly was during the Great Famine. The primary sources are chronicles often written by monks who may have been prone to exaggeration to emphasize the horror of the times. There is very little archaeological evidence, but the accounts are so numerous and so grimly consistent across different regions that it is impossible to dismiss them entirely. Chroniclers like Johannes Trucklow wrote explicitly that the poor ate their own children. Whether this was a common occurrence or a rare, shocking aberration is debated, but the fact that it was recorded at all speaks to the sheer, unimaginable desperation of the time. You are now living in this world of terrifying rumors. You lock your door at night, not just against thieves, but against something far worse. You look at your own children, their bodies stick thin, their bellies swollen from kwashiorkor, and you feel a wave of love and a simultaneous, terrifying primal calculus that you desperately try to push from your mind. There is a quirky, if deeply macabre, detail from some of the chronicles suggesting a hierarchy of this desperate consumption. It was said that people would first eat dogs, cats, and rats until there were none left. Then they would turn to eating their own shoes, harnesses, and any other leather goods they possessed. The final step was the one no one wanted to admit. You are at the absolute nadir of human existence. You are no longer a farmer, a father, a member of a community. You are a starving animal trapped in a world where there is nothing left to eat. The food is not just bad, it has ceased to exist entirely. The very fabric of your humanity is being shredded by a hunger so profound that the most horrific act imaginable has entered the realm of possibility. You huddle with your family in the dark, cold hut, listening to the rain that still falls outside, and you wonder if you will survive to see the morning and what you might have to do to make that happen. This is the ultimate failure of the medieval food system. Not just that it was foul or monotonous, but that it was so fragile it could collapse into the deepest pit of horror. Somehow you survived. The Great Famine receded, the rains eventually stopped, and the harvest slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. But the experience has changed you. Or rather, in our journey, we will allow it to change your very station in life. Through some stroke of impossible luck, perhaps you marry the daughter of a wealthy merchant, or distinguish yourself in a local conflict. You have been elevated. You're no longer a peasant scrabbling in the dirt. You are now a minor noble, a lord of a small manor yourself. You have left the world of the perpetually simmering pottage pot and entered the world of the roasting spit. But you will soon discover that wealth does not guarantee a good meal. It just introduces a whole new category of disgusting. Your new life is defined by excess. You now live in a stone house with multiple rooms and glass windows. You have servants, and most importantly, you have a kitchen that is a whirlwind of activity, preparing food not just for sustenance, but for status. The centerpiece of your new diet is meat. Great, glorious joints of it, beef, mutton, pork, venison. The very things you once dreamed of as a starving peasant are now available to you every single day. But here you encounter a fundamental problem of your new wealthy life, one that is identical to the problem you faced as a peasant: the race against rot. While you have more food, you still have no refrigeration. The same forces of decay that turned your meager stores to mold and simmer at work in your well-stocked larder. A deer brought in from a hunt must be consumed quickly. A side of beef from a slaughtered ox represents a huge amount of perishable flesh. In the summer heat, a joint of meat can begin to turn in a single day, developing that telltale sheen and the faint, sweet, sickly smell of the beginnings of putrefaction. You cannot afford to waste this food. It is not just a source of calories, it is a symbol of your wealth and power. Throwing away a hunch of venison because it's a bit off would be an unthinkable economic loss and a blow to your prestige. So what do? You do what every noble in your era does. You cover it up, and your weapon of choice is spices. This is a mainstream historical fact that completely upends the modern understanding of medieval noble cuisine. We think of spices, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, pepper, saffron as delicate flavor enhancers. For you, they are instruments of deception, powerful aromatic agents used to mask the taste and smell of meat that is beginning to go bad. Spices are astronomically expensive. They're imported from the far-off, almost mythical lands of Asia, traveling thousands of miles along dangerous trade routes. A pound of nutmeg costs the same as a cow. A small pouch of saffron is worth more than a horse. Their value is so immense that they are often kept in a locked spice coffer to which only you or your lady have the key. You're not using these precious, costly powders to create a symphony of subtle flavors. You're using them as a form of culinary warfare against decay. Is the roast pork beginning to smell a little funky? Your cook will create a powerful sauce made from wine, vinegar, breadcrumbs, and a staggering amount of cloves and pepper to drench it in. Is the fish for Friday's meal a day past its prime? It will be baked into a pie with a thick crust and a filling loaded with ginger, mace, and sugar. The goal is to overwhelm the senses, to blast the palate with such a powerful combination of sweet, sour, and spicy that the underlying taste of incipient rot is completely obliterated. Let's watch your cook prepare a typical sauce for a joint of roast meat. He takes a mortar and pestle and pounds together a handful of cloves, a dozen peppercorns, a thumb-sized piece of ginger, and a pinch of precious saffron for color. He mixes this with sour wine or vinegar and then thickens the sauce with breadcrumbs that have been toasted and pounded into a powder. The resulting concoction is a thick, gritty, tensely flavored sludge. It is at once fiery from the pepper, numbing from the cloves, aromatic from the ginger, and sour from the vinegar. When this is poured over the meat, it's all you can taste. The meat itself is just a texture, a vehicle for the overwhelming power of the spice mixture. There's a quirky and telling detail in the surviving recipe books from this period, like the famous form of curry from the court of Richard II. The recipes rarely specify exact quantities, instead using vague terms like the good amount or enough, but they consistently call for combinations of spices that seem bizarre and clashing to a modern palate. A dish might contain ginger cloves, saffron, and sugar all at once. This wasn't because they had unsophisticated palates. It was because the goal was not balance, but bombardment. Historians still argue about this spices as preservation theory. Some scholars contend and that spices were used purely for flavor and as a display of wealth, and that any meat that was truly off would have been discarded. They argue that the powerful flavors were simply what the medieval palate preferred. Others maintain that while spices do have some mild antimicrobial properties, their primary function was indeed to make slightly spoiled food palatable. The truth probably lies in the middle. You wouldn't eat a truly rotten, dangerous piece of meat. But a piece of meat that was merely high, or a polite euphemism for starting to decay, was fair game if its flaws could be masked by a sufficiently powerful and expensive layer of spice. So here you are at the high table in your hall, a servant placing a platter in front of you. On it is a piece of mutton swimming in a dark, fragrant, and gritty sauce. You take a bite. The heat of the pepper stings your tongue. The perfume of the cloves fills your sinuses, and a wave of exotic warmth spreads through your mouth. You can barely taste the meat itself. You're eating your wealth, and you're eating a testament to the fact that even for the rich, the fundamental problem of medieval food remained the same. You're still in a desperate race against rot, but now you fight it not with crude salt, but with the gilded aromatic hammer of imported spice. You are seated at the high table in your great hall, ready for a feast. This is not just a meal. It is a theatrical performance designed to aghast and display your immense status. The food you're about to be served has been manipulated, decorated, and disguised to a degree that would be almost unrecognizable to a modern diner. The goal is not naturalism or highlighting the quality of the ingredients. The goal is to create a spectacle, a series of edible illusions that shout your wealth from the rooftops. A procession of servants emerges from the kitchen, carrying enormous platters. The centerpiece, the pièce de resistance of the first course, is placed before you. It is a peacock, resplendent in its full iridescent plumage, its magnificent tail fanned out as if it were still alive. It looks like a living sculpture, a jewel-toned marvel. But this is not a simple roast bird. The preparation of this creature was a bizarre and frankly grotesque process. The cook did not simply pluck and roast it. To preserve the magnificent feathers, the peacock was painstakingly skinned. The skin with the feathers attached being carefully peeled off the body in one piece. The naked bird was then roasted. Once cooked, the meat was often coated in a glaze or even covered in gold leaf. Then the original feathered skin was carefully sewn or fitted back onto the cooked carcass. The bird was then mounted on a platter in a lilac pose, its neck and head propped up, its tail feathers reattached and fanned out. Some recipes even call for stuffing the beak with a piece of cloth soaked in camphor or alcohol, which would then be lit so the bird would appear to be breathing fire as it was presented. You, as the Lord, are given the honor of carving this magnificent creation, but the experience of eating it is a profound disappointment. Peacock meat is notoriously tough, stringy, and dry. It has a dry, unpleasant flavor. You chew on a piece of the gilded, feathered bird, and it's like gnawing on a piece of beautiful, flavorless leather. The dish was never about the taste. It was about the jaw-dropping spectacle of its presentation. This is a mainstream historical fact of noble banqueting. The visual impact of the food often mattered far more than its palatability. Swans and other exotic birds were given similar treatment, served up as impressive but largely inedible table decorations. But the assault on the senses does not stop with feathered birds. Your cook is also a master of food coloring, using a palette of natural dyes to transform dishes into a garish, unnatural rainbow. The concept of food looking natural is completely alien. The goal is to make it look as artificial and expensive as possible. The most prized color is a brilliant golden yellow, achieved with saffron, a pottage for the rich known as mom. A thick stew of chicken wine and almonds would be colored a vibrant yellow with a prodigal amount of precious saffron threads. Other colors are created with a variety of plant and even mineral-based dyes. A deep green can be made from pounded parsley or spinach juice. A rich purple or violet comes from orchil, a type of lichen, which gives food a beautiful color, but also a faint, unpleasant, earthy or chemical taste. A brilliant red is made from sandalwood or alkanet root. Even black is a desirable color achieved with dried blood or dark spices. Your cook might create a single dish like a custard or a jelly and divide it into sections, coloring each part a different vibrant hue, creating a kind of medieval edible Mandarin painting. There's a quirky and slightly alarming tidbit about this practice. Some of the dyes were not just unappetizing, but potentially toxic. A brilliant blue, for example, was sometimes made from the crushed petals of the larkspur flower, which is poisonous. While the amounts used might have been small, the willingness to use such substances speaks to the overwhelming importance of visual effect over health or flavor. You might be eating a dish that is beautiful to look at, but is slowly poisoning you. Historians still debate the symbolic meaning of these colors. Was the garishness simply a display of wealth, the ability to afford the expensive dyeing agents and the skilled labor to apply them? Or did the colors have deeper meanings, perhaps relating to the humoral theories of medicine that dominated the era? A red dish might be seen as hot and moist, while a green one might be cold and dry. It is possible that your feast was not just a visual spectacle, but also a complex color-coded attempt to balance the health of your guests. You look down the long table, you see a dish of jelly, deals shimmering a lurid green. Next to it is a platter of small meatballs, half of them dyed yellow with saffron, the other half black with blood. A servant offers you a piece of fish that has been aged into a paste, molded back into the shape of a fish, and then painted with stripes of red and white. It is a psychedelic, almost hallucinatory landscape of food that has been tortured into artifice. The experience is profoundly disorienting. Nothing tastes like it looks. The beautiful peacock tastes like shoe leather. The vibrant green jelly tastes vaguely of pond scum and parsley. The red and white striped fish paste tastes of ginger and cloves. It is a cuisine of complete sensory dissonance. You're not eating food. You are consuming symbols. Each garishly colored, unnaturally shaped dish is a testament to your power, your ability to bend nature to your will, to transform the raw and the real into the artificial and the impressive. It is in its own way just as grim as the peasant's pottage. It is food that has had its soul ripped out and replaced with a gaudy, inedible costume. The parade of refathered peacocks and a naturally dyed jellies is only the beginning. You settle in for the main event, the feast proper. This is not a simple three-course meal. It is a grueling hours endurance event, a marathon of consumption and display that is governed by rigid ceremony and designed more for pageantry than for pleasure. The Great Hall is cold despite the huge fire roaring in the hearth. The stone walls seem to leach the warmth from the air, and you can feel a constant faint draft on the back of your neck. The feast is structured in a series of courses or removes, but a medieval course is not a single dish. It is a wave of dozens of different dishes, all brought out from the kitchen at once and laid out on the long tables. The first course might consist of 20 or 30 different items, various roasts, beef mutton, pork pies filled with meat, and fruit potages thickened with almond milk, fried pastries, and those colorful jellies. The sheer variety is overwhelming, a smorgasbord of culinary chaos. You at the high table get the best view in the first choice, but the quality and variety of food diminishes rapidly as you go down the social hierarchy. The long trestle tables in the main body of the hall are for your lesser retainers and guests. They will be served fewer dishes, and the meat they get will be from less desirable cuts. The concept of everyone eating the same meal is unthinkable. The feast is a physical manifestation of the social pyramid, and everyone knows their place. A mainstream historical fact of the medieval banquet is that most of the food was served lukewarm at best. The kitchen was often in a separate building to reduce the risk of fire to the main house. The dishes had to be prepared, arranged on platters, and then carried across an open courtyard in all weathers. By the time this massive wave of food reaches the tables in the Great Hall, much of it is already cold. You eat cold, congealed gravy, tepid meat, and pastries that have lost their warmth and crispness. The magnificent boar's head carried into the sound of trumpets is more of a cold centerpiece than a hot meal. You do not have your own plate. Instead, you have a trencher, which as a wealthy lord is made of a thick, round slice of stale bread. You place your chosen food upon this edible plate. At the end of the course, you might eat the gravy-soaked trencher yourself, but it was more common and a sign of charity to give it to the poor or to the dogs that gathered at your feet. For lesser guests, the trencher might be made of wood or even pewter. You eat with your fingers and a personal knife, which you use to spear pieces of meat and convey them to your mouth. The fork exists, but is seen as a strange, effeminate Italian novelty, and it will not be common in England for centuries. The pacing of the meal is bizarre. After an hour or so, a trumpet sounds. The servants clear away the entire first course, much of it barely touched. The sheer volume of food is so great that no one could possibly sample everything. This leads to immense waste. The huge portion of the food prepared for a feast was never even eaten by the guests. It would be cleared away, and what was still presentable might be consumed by the servants, with the rest given as alms to the poor who gathered at the castle gates. Then the second course arrives. Another 20 or 30 dishes are laid out. This course might feature more exotic birds, more elaborate pies, some with live birds inside that would fly out when the crust was cut, and sweeter, more dessert-like meat dishes. You're already feeling full, but the feast demands that you continue. You pick at a few more items. Your appetite waning, the conversation is loud. The wine and ale are flowing freely, and the cold of the hall is seeping deeper into your bones. Between the courses, there are entertainments. A troupe of acrobats might perform in the center of the hall. A minstrel will sing long, rambling ballads about heroic knights and tragic love affairs. This is all part of the experience designed to stretch out the time and add to the sense of occasion, but it also contributes to the coldness of the food and the marathon-like quality of the evening. There is a quirky and rather disgusting tidbit about table manners, or the lack thereof. People would throw unwanted bones and scraps directly onto the floor, which was usually covered in rushes or straw. These rushes were not changed daily, but perhaps only a few times a year. The floor of your great hall is a festering, compressed mat of old food, spilled ale rushes, and animal droppings. The Dutch humanist Erasmus, writing a bit later but reflecting on long-standing habits, described flaws that were a vile collection of spittle vomit. The urine of dogs and men, spilled beer scraps of fish, and other abominations not fit to be mentioned. Historians still debate the true purpose of such theatrical, wasteful, and uncomfortable feasts. Were they genuinely enjoyable for the participants, or were they a form of social obligation, a burdensome but necessary ritual of power? The evidence suggests it was more of the latter. A feast was a political tool. It was how you cemented alliances, rewarded loyalty, and intimidated rivals. The enjoyment of the food itself was almost a secondary concern. As the third course is cleared away and the final offering of wafers, cheese, and spiced wine is presented, you are exhausted. You've been sitting on a hard wooden bench for 4 or 5 hours. You are cold, you are bloated, and you've endured a relentless assault of lukewarm, heavily spiced food and loud entertainment. It was a magnificent display of your wealth and power. It was a political triumph. But as an actual dining experience, it was in its own way just as miserable as gnawing on a piece of rock-hard salty bread in a smoky peasant's hut. The lavish theatrical feast is over. But your relationship with food has not gotten any simpler. As a person of status and education, or at least one who employs an educated physician, your diet is not governed by hunger or even by taste. It is dictated by a complex and baffling system of medical theory that has dominated Western thought since the time of the ancient Greeks. You must eat not what you want, but what is deemed appropriate for your specific constitution, according to the doctrine of the four humors. This is a mainstream historical fact that is absolutely central to understanding the medieval elites' approach to food. The theory of humoralism posits that the human body is composed of four essential fluids or humors: blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor corresponds to one of the four elements, air, water, fire, earth, and possesses two of the four qualities, hot, cold, moist, dry. A healthy person has these four humors in perfect balance. Illness is caused by an imbalance in excess or deficiency of one of the humors. Your personal temperament is also determined by your dominant humor. If you are naturally cheerful and optimistic, you're considered sanguine, dominated by blood, which is hot and moist. If you are calm and stoic, you are phlegmatic, phlegm, cold and moist. If you're ambitious and short-tempered, you are choleric, yellow bile, hot and dry. And if you are prone to sadness and introspection, you are melancholic, black bile, cold and rain. But it doesn't stop there. Every single thing you could possibly eat or drink also has its own humoral properties. Pork, for example, is considered to be moist and cold. Red wine is hot and dry. Fish are cold and moist. Carrots are hot and moist. The job of your physician and your cook is to devise a menu that perfectly balances your personal humoral makeup. The goal of eating is not pleasure or nutrition in the modern sense. It is a constant, delicate act of medical fine-tuning. Let's say you are a naturally choleric person, hot-tempered and ambitious. Your nature is hot and dry. Therefore, to maintain balance, you must avoid foods that are also hot and dry, as this would exacerbate your caloric tendencies, leading to anger, indigestion, and perhaps even fever. You should avoid onions, garlic, and spicy red wine. Instead, your diet should focus on foods that are cold and moist to counteract your natural disposition. You should be eating lots of fish, lettuce, and watery fruits like melon. The application of this theory leads to food pairings and preparations that can seem utterly bizarre to a modern palate. Fish, being naturally cold and moist, were almost always cooked using a hot and dry method to achieve balance. This is why you see so many recipes for fried or baked fish, often served with a sauce made from hot ingredients like wine, mustard, or pepper. It was a culinary equation. The coldness and moistness of the fish, plus the heat and dryness of the cooking method and sauce, equals a perfectly balanced, healthy dish. Roasting a piece of beef hot and moist was fine, but it should be served with a sour sauce, cold and dry, to correct its qualities. The complexity is dizzying. The qualities of a food could even change depending on its location. A fish from a clear, fast-running stream was considered better than one from a muddy, stagnant pond. The age of an animal mattered. The meat of a young lamb was considered more moist than that of an old sheep. Your cook wasn't just a cook. He was a kind of pharmacist, mixing and matching ingredients based on their supposed medical properties. There's a quirky and telling detail in how this system classified common foods. Chicken was considered one of the most perfect balanced foods. Moderately warm and moist, easily digestible, and suitable for almost anyone, especially invalids. This is why you see chicken broth or restoratives made from chicken recommended so often for the sick. It was the medieval equivalent of a superfood. On the other hand, beef was considered rather coarse and liable to produce melancholy black bile, so it was often recommended to be eaten in moderation. Historians still argue about how rigidly this system was actually followed in practice. The surviving medical texts and recipe books are prescriptive. They show the ideal. Did a choleric lord really refuse a dish of roast venison with a peppery sauce because it was too hot for him? Or was the theory more of a general guideline, a sophisticated justification for the kinds of food the elite wanted to eat anyway? It was likely a bit of both. The theory provided a prestigious, scientific-sounding framework for a diet that was already heavy in meat and wine, while also guiding the elaborate sources and preparations that were fashionable. For you, this means that your meals are fraught with anxiety. You have a slight cold, which is a cold and moist affliction caused by an excess of phlegm. Your physician solemnly instructs you to eat roasted chicken hot and to drink spiced wine hot and dry to counteract the imbalance. You must avoid all fish, dairy, and watery vegetables, as these would only make your condition worse. You crave a simple piece of cheese, but you dare not eat it for fear of upsetting your humoral balance and prolonging your illness. Your diet is a constant, confusing, and often contradictory negotiation between your desires and the rigid, esoteric doctrines of your physician. Food is not for enjoyment, it is medicine. And like most medicine of the time, it is based on a completely flawed understanding of the human body, leading to a cuisine that is not only often unpalatable, but also medically useless. The peasant starves for lack of food. You, the Lord, are starved of pleasure by a surplus of bad theory. Your life as a noble is governed by the baffling dictates of humoral theory. But there is another more powerful force shaping your palate. A deep, all-consuming obsession with sugar. For you, sugar is not a common kitchen staple for sweetening desserts. It is an exotic, fantastically expensive, and high-status spice just like saffron or cloves. It was originally imported from the Arab world, grown in places like Cyprus and Sicily. And it arrives in England in hard conical loaves, a rare and precious commodity, and you put it on everything. This is a mainstream historical fact that is shocking to the modern palate, which is accustomed to a sharp division between sweet and savory. In your world, that division does not exist. Sugar is a seasoning used with the same liberal enthusiasm as salt and pepper, and it finds its way into nearly every dish on the noble table, especially meat and fish dishes. The idea that sweetness belongs only at the end of the meal is a culinary development that is still centuries in the future. Imagine your feast table. The great roast, perhaps a joint of pork, is brought out. It is not served with a simple gravy. It is covered in a thick wheat and sour sauce, an agrodolce, or aioli, that is a hallmark of elite medieval cuisine. A typical sauce might be made from wine vinegar and a heavy-handed dose of sugar thickened with breadcrumbs and flavored with cinnamon and ginger. The result is a sticky, cloying glaze that completely transforms the flavor of the meat into something alien to modern tastes. You take a bite of roast pork that tastes simultaneously of meat vinegar and cinnamon sugar. The most iconic example of this sweet and savory fusion is the meat pie. A great pie with a thick pastry crust known as a coffin is placed before you. You cut into it, and the filling is not the simple savory mix of meat and gravy you might expect. It is a dense concoction of minced pork or chicken, heavily spiced with cloves and mace, and studded with a profusion of dried fruits like raisins, dates, and prunes. And then a huge amount of sugar is mixed in, creating a filling that is intensely sweet, spicy, and meaty all at once. It's a dish that straddles the line between a main course and a dessert, a culinary chimera that is a pillar of your cuisine. Even fish is not safe from the sugar invasion. On the many fast days when meat is forbidden, you might be served a dish of salmon or pike. The fish would be poached and then served with a sauce made from ground almonds, a common thickener wine, and of course a generous quantity of sugar. The delicate flavor of the fish is completely swamped by a wave of nutty sweetness. Why this obsession with sugar? There are a few reasons. First and foremost, it is a spectacular display of wealth. To use sugar so prodigiously, to treat it as a common seasoning, is to announce to your guests that you are fabulously rich, able to afford the most expensive ingredients from the farthest corners of the known world. A heavily sweetened dish is a dish that tastes of money. Secondly, it fits perfectly within the humoral system of medicine we just discussed. Sugar was classified by physicians as being hot and moist in the first degree. This made it a useful ingredient for balancing other foods, and it was considered to have various health benefits. It was thought to be good for the stomach to cleanse the blood and to be particularly nourishing for the elderly and the sick. A spoonful of sugar was quite literally seen as medicine. There's a quirky and telling detail about the presentation of sugar itself. At the end of a great feast, a special course called the void or issue would be served. This often included spiced sugar slates, which were little discs of hardened sugar paste flavored with spices like ginger or aniseed, almost like a medieval breath mint. It also included comfits, which were seeds or nuts like caraway or almonds coated in layer after layer of hardened sugar. This was a painstaking and expensive process, and serving this was yet another way to show off. But this sugar-laden diet had a terrible and predictable consequence: dental ruin. While the peasants' teeth were worn down by the grit in their bread, your teeth as a noble are being systematically destroyed by decay. You have no toothbrush, no fluoride toothpaste, no concept of dental hygiene beyond perhaps rinsing your mouth with water or rubbing your teeth with a cloth. The constant exposure to sugar creates the perfect environment for cavities. The historical record is full of accounts of nobles suffering from excruciating toothaches, abscesses, and tooth loss. Skeletons of the wealthy from this period show appallingly bad dental health, a stark contrast to the worn but less decayed teeth of the common people. Queen Elizabeth I, a few centuries later, but a product of the same sugar-loving culinary tradition, was famously known for her black rotten teeth. Historians still debate the precise flavor profile of this cuisine. Was it truly as sickly sweet as the recipes suggest? Or did the heavy use of sour ingredients like vinegar and verjuice, the juice of unripe grapes, create a more balanced sweet and sour taste? The recipes certainly point to a palate that was far more tolerant of and even desirous of sweetness in savory context than ours is today. So you sit at your gnawing on a piece of sugar pork, your mouth a battleground of clashing flavors, your teeth slowly rotting in your old skull. It is a cuisine of aggressive competitive sweetness, a way of eating that is as much about status signaling as it is about taste. The irony is profound. As a poor peasant, your biggest food-related health problem was getting enough calories. Now, as a rich lord, one of your biggest health problems is a direct result of your conspicuous consumption of the most expensive and desirable foodstuff you can find. Your life, whether as a peasant or a lord, is governed not just by the seasons and the availability of food, but by the rigid dictates of the Christian church. And one of the most profound ways the church intrudes upon your daily life is by controlling what you can and cannot eat. For nearly half the days of the year, every Friday, every Saturday in some regions, the entire 40 days of Lent, and various other vigils and holy days, the consumption of meat from land animals is strictly forbidden. This is a mainstream historical fact that utterly dominated the medieval food economy and the rhythm of eating. You are, for a significant portion of your life, forced to be a pescatarian. This sounds manageable, even healthy to a modern ear. You imagine fresh grilled fish, perhaps with a squeeze of lemon. You must once again discard this pleasant image. For the vast majority of people, especially those living in land like you, fish day does not mean fresh fish. It means preserved fish. It means enduring the monotonous, stinking, and seed-crushing reality of salt cod and pickled herring. The logistics of supplying an entire continent with fish on the same designated days were immense, and it gave rise to one of the largest and most important industries of the Middle Ages, the herring and cod fisheries of the North Sea and the Atlantic. Great fleets of ships would catch these fish in mind-boggling quantities. They were then processed on an industrial scale. Herring, an oily fish, was typically gutted, salted, and packed in barrels, creating a product known as pickled or soused herring. It was slimy, intensely salty, and had a powerful, pungent, fishy odor that could make your eyes water. Cod, a leaner fish, was preserved in two main ways. It could be heavily salted and dried, creating the familiar salt cod we encountered earlier, or it could be dried without salt in the cold, clean air of places like Norway or Iceland until it became a hard, rigid board of desiccated fish flesh. This was known as stockfish. Both products were almost indestructible, easy to transport, and became the staple protein for much of Europe on meatless days. They were, in essence, the fuel of Christendom. For you as a peasant, a fish day meal is grim. You take a piece of your salt cod, which you have purchased at great expense from a traveling merchant. It is as hard as a piece of wood and smells faintly of a swamp. You must first embark on the laborious process of making it edible. You soak it for at least a day, changing the water many times to leach out the aggressive saltiness. Then you often have to beat it with a wooden mallet to break down the tough, rigid fibers of the flesh. The rehydrated fish is then typically flaked and thrown into the pottage pot, where its salty, fishy flavor will permeate the entire or it might be mixed with mashed peas to create a kind of rough fish cake. It's nutritious, but it is a joyless, repetitive chore to eat. Even for you as a Lord Fish Day is a challenge, though, one you meet with wealth and spice. You're not limited to salt cod. You might have access to a wider variety of preserved fish like salted salmon or smoked sturgeon. But the fundamental problem remains. Your cook's job is to take these salty, stinky, preserved products and disguise them with all the culinary artistry he can muster. Salt cod will be transformed into elaborate pies filled with dried fruit and sugar. The fish itself mashed into a paste so its original texture is unrecognizable. Pickled herring will be minced and mixed with ground almonds and spices to create a spread for your bread. The goal is to obscure the core ingredient as much as possible. The one great advantage you have as a lord is the fish pond. It was a status symbol for any manor or monastery to have its own well-stocked fish ponds, providing a source of fresh fish. These ponds were carefully managed ecosystems, typically stocked with carp, tench, pike, and eels. On fish day, your servants can simply go out and net a fresh carp. But even this is not as idyllic as it sounds. Carp, a bottom-feeding fish, often has a muddy, unpleasant taste. To purge this, it was sometimes kept in a separate tank of clean water for a few days before being eaten. And of course, it would be served with one of those overwhelming sweet and sour sauces made of vinegar, sugar, and spices. There's a quirky and fascinating gray area in the church's definition of fish that led to some creative culinary loopholes. The rule forbade the meat of land animals, but what about animals that lived in the water? The definition of fish was expanded to include a host of semi-aquatic creatures. Beaver, particularly its scaly tail, was often considered a fish and was a prized dish during Lent. Puffins and other seabirds were also classified as fish by some ecclesiastical authorities. And most bizarrely, the barnacle goose, a bird that nests in the Arctic, was believed to spontaneously generate from barnacles growing on driftwood. Because of this supposed aquatic origin, it was perfectly acceptable Lenten eating. Historians still debate the true impact of this religious dietary restriction. Did it lead to better overall health by forcing people to eat fish rich in omega-3s? Or did the reliance on heavily salted products contribute to other health issues? Economically, it was a massive driver of trade and exploration. But for the average person, it created a culinary calendar of stark contrasts. The richness of a meat day versus the grim fishy obligation of a fast day. So for almost half the year, your diet is dominated by the ghost of a fish. The smell of it, salty, pungent, slightly rotten, clings to your clothes and lingers in your kitchen. It is the taste of piety, the flavor of obedience, and it is a taste you come to dread. Your grand feast continues to unfold, a relentless assault of sight, sound, and flavor. Between the main courses, as servants clear away the dozens of lukewarm dishes, a special kind of entertainment is brought forth. It is designed to elicit gasps of wonder from your guests and serve as a topic of conversation for weeks to come. This is the subtlety, a form of edible sculpture that represents the absolute zenith of non-functional status food. A team of servants carries in a huge platter or a decorated board. On it is a meticulously crafted scene. It might be a miniature castle complete with turrets, battlements, and tiny knights standing guard. It could be a depiction of a famous mythological scene like St. George slaying the dragon, or a religious tableau such as the Annunciation. These are not crude, lumpy creations. They are intricate, detailed works of art, often brightly painted and gilded. They are, in theory, made from edible materials, but they are absolutely not meant to be eaten. This is a mainstream historical feature of the most elaborate banquets of the High and Late Middle Ages. The subtlety was a form of culinary theater, a moment of pure spectacle that had nothing to do with sustenance and everything to do with displaying the skill of your cook and the depth of your purse. The host's coat of arms, a political allegory, or a scene honoring the guest of honor were all common theme. It was a way to communicate a message, to flatter, or to boast using sugar and marzipan as the medium. The primary materials for these sculptures were sugar paste, a mixture of sugar and gum, tragacanth, similar to modern fondant, and marzipan, a paste of ground almonds and sugar. Both were incredibly expensive. Almonds had to be imported, and sugar, as we know, was worth a fortune. To use these precious ingredients for a purely decorative object that would not even be eaten was the ultimate expression of conspicuous consumption. It was, in essence, creating art out of money. The process of creating a soda tie was incredibly labor intensive. Your master cook, who was as much a sculptor as a chef, would spend days on a single creation. He would use molds to shape the basic forms, then carve the fine details by hand. The pieces would be assembled using a sugar-based glue. Then the whole structure would be painted using the same food-safe or not-so-safe dyes used for other dishes. Saffron for yellow, sandalwood for red, parsley juice for green. Gold leaf would be applied liberally to add a dazzling finish. Let's imagine the St. George and the dragon sculpture being placed on the table. The dragon's scales are individually molded from green-tinted marzipan. Its eyes are red-hot sugar jewels. A plume of spun sugar looking like smoke comes from its mouth. St. George, a strider white horse made of sugar paste, has a tiny delicate sword gilded with real gold. The whole scene is breathtaking. The guests marvel at the craftsmanship, the detail, the sheer artistry of it. But no one reaches for a knife and fork. To even think of eating it would be a terrible fooer, like taking a chisel to a marble statue. There's a quirky and rather clever aspect to some zotis. They could contain hidden tricks or surprises. A castle might be designed with a hollow interior, and when a designated part was lifted, it could reveal a CVA of live birds that would flutter out, creating a moment of shock and delight. Or a sutelli might be a kind of puzzle with allegorical figures and inscriptions that the guests were meant to interpret. It was interactive entertainment, a way to engage the minds of the guests, not just their stomachs. The tea evolved from an earlier tradition of simply molding jellies or other foods into interesting shapes. But by the 15th century, it had become a distinct art form. Historians still debate the full range of materials used. While sugar and marzipan were the most common for the finest creations, less prestigious saddleries might have been made from a base of specially prepared bread dough or even wax, which was then painted. The line between food and decorative art was completely blurred. A recipe from the period for a subtlety of a stag instructs the cook to make the antlers from real antlers or from wood, and to use real hide for certain parts. The final product was a bizarre hybrid of the edible and the inedible. So what happens to these magnificent creations after the feast? They are not eaten. They might be left on display for a day or two as a lingering testament to the glory of the event, but ultimately their fate is unglamorous. Made of sugar gum gum and almond paste, they are a powerful attractant for insects and vermin. They would eventually be dismantled. The precious gold leaf might be carefully scraped off for reuse. The sugar and marzipan, now stale and dirty, would likely be discarded or perhaps in a less grand household, recycled into some other concoction where its texture and purity no longer mattered. The sod is perhaps the most perfect symbol of the absurdity of elite medieval food culture. It is food that has transcended its purpose day. It has become so refined, so expensive, and so aesthetically overwrought that it has ceased to be food at all. It is a silent, sugary testament to a world where what you ate, or in this case, what you conspicuously didn't eat, was the ultimate measure of your worth. While the peasant in the field dreamed of a single life-giving scrap of meat, you, the lord, are commissioning statues made of sugar designed to be admired and then thrown away. The gulf between your two worlds has never been wider. Your life, whether as a peasant or a lord, has been largely stationary, confined to the small universe of your village or manor. But now you must undertake a journey. Perhaps you are a peasant on a pilgrimage to a distant shrine, seeking a cure for an ailment or forgiveness for a sin. Or perhaps you're a minor noble traveling to another lord's castle for a wedding or a tournament. Whatever the reason, you're on the road. And on the road, your already precarious relationship with food becomes even more fraught with danger, uncertainty, and filth. You do not have a car, a train, or even a well-sprung carriage. You're traveling on foot, or at best on the back of a slow, low, plodding horse. The roads are not poor paved highways. They are deeply rooted, muddy tracks that turn into impossible bogs in the rain. Your progress is slow, perhaps only 15 or 20 meters on a good day. There are no fast food restaurants, no convenience stores, no reliable sources of safe, clean food. You're at the mercy of what you can carry and what you can find along the way. As a peasant pilgrim, you start your journey with a few meager provisions. You have a small sack containing a hunk of your hard, dark bread and perhaps a piece of even harder, saltier cheese. This is your food for the first few days. You eat it sparingly, gnawing on the dry bread as you walk. You refill your water flask from streams you pass, knowing the risk but having little choice. The water is likely cleaner than your village stream, but it's still a gamble. When your provisions run out, you must rely on the kindness of strangers or the commercial offerings of the towns and inns you pass through. Monasteries were known for offering simple charity to pilgrims, a bed of straw, the barn, and a dole of bread and ale. But these are often spaced a day's journey apart, and there's no guarantee of a welcome. Your primary option is the inn or the alehouse. You arrive at a village at dusk, weary and footsore. The inn is a noisy, crowded, and squalid place. The air is thick with a familiar smell of smoke, spilled ale, and unwashed bodies. You have very little money, so your options are limited. The innkeeper offers you a place on the floor of the common room, where you will sleep, packed in with a dozen other strangers. For food, you can buy a mug of ale, which is as always safer than the water, and a bowl of the house pottage. This is the infamous pottage of the day. It simmers in a great cauldron over the inn's fire. A perpetual stew, just like the one in your hut, but with a far more mysterious and transient list of ingredients. The innkeeper will throw in whatever is cheap available or on the verge of spoiling. It might contain some stringy bits of old mutton, wilted cabbage, and whatever dregs are left over from the richer guest meals, you eat it with suspicion. The innkeeper is a notoriously unscrupulous figure, the town equivalent of the cheating miller. He is known for overcharging, watering down his ale, and serving meat of a questionable origin. Is the meat in this pottage truly mutton? Or is it, as the dark joke suggests, a stray dog or a cat? You eat it because you have to, the gnawing hunger overriding your fear. As a traveling noble, your experience is different, but not necessarily better. You travel with a small retinue, including a servant to handle your baggage. You can afford a private room at the inn, which might offer the luxury of a bed with a straw mattress, likely crawling with fleas and lice. Your food options are better, but the fundamental problem of quality control remains. The innkeeper, seeing your fine clothes, will offer you a roast chicken or a meat pie. But this is where your urban vulnerability comes in. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval towns had a thriving industry of pre-cooked food sellers, the ancestors of modern takeaway. You could buy hot pies, pasties, and roasted meats from street vendors in cook shops. But the hygiene was appalling, and the food was often dangerously old or made from spoiled ingredients. A famous London proclamation from 1351 decries the sale of pies made with putrid and stinking meat. The pieman would disguise the taste of his rancid filling with a heavy dose of pepper and spices, a trick you know well from your own kitchen, but in his hands it is used with far more malicious intent. You, a wealthy traveler, are a prime target for this kind of scam. There's a quirky and rather grim tale, almost certainly an urban legend, but popular in its day, of the demon barber Sweeney Todd, who would murder his clients and give the bodies to his neighbor, Mrs. Lovett, to bake into her famous meat pies. While a fictional horror story, it reflects a very real and pervasive public anxiety about what exactly was in the food you bought from strangers in a city. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval food regulations. Most towns had guilds and officials who were supposed to inspect food for quality. Bakers could be put in the pillory for selling underweight bread. Butchers could be punished for selling diseased meat. However, enforcement was patchy and easily corruptible. For a traveler passing through a town for only a day or two, you were an easy mark with little legal recourse. So whether you are rich or poor traveling as a culinary ordeal, you are constantly exposed to unfamiliar food of dubious quality. The risk of food poisoning, what you would call a bad belly or a surfeited, is immense. A severe bout of vomiting and diarrhea on the road with no access to clean water for rehydration could be a death sentence. You long for the relative safety of your own monotonous food, be it the peasant's cottage or the Lord's spicy roast. At least there you know the provenance of the filth. Here on the road, every meal is a roll of the dice, a gamble with your health. In a world where medicine is useless and hygiene is a dream, the noise, filth, and anxiety of the road fade into a distant, feverish memory. Your journey, whether as a pilgrim seeking salvation or a noble seeking refuge, has led you to a place of profound and unsettling stillness, a monastery. You've been granted entry into this self-contained world, a fortress of order and piety. The moment you pass through the gatehouse, the chaos of the medieval world seems to fall away, replaced by a silence so complete it feels like a physical presence. The air no longer smells of mud and waste. It smells of damp stone, beeswax, and tilled earth. And for the first time in this entire journey, you're about to eat food that is clean, reliable, and utterly soul-crushingly bland. You've traded the terrors of scarcity and spoilage for the tyranny of routine. You are now living by the bell, your days segmented into a rigid schedule of prayer work and contemplation. When the bell tolls for the main meal, you file into the refectory, the monastic dining hall. The contrast with every other eating environment you've known is staggering. The room is long and narrow with high ceilings and clean scrubbed wooden tables. There are no dogs underfoot, no rushes on the floor concealing layers of filth. The floor is made of smooth flagstones swept clean. The only sounds are the shuffling of sandals and the soft rustle of woolen robes. Your meal is governed by the rule of Saint Benedict, the foundational text for Western monasticism since the 6th century. This mainstream historical document laid out a comprehensive guide for monastic life with specific and detailed instructions on diet. The rule was not designed to create a pleasant dining experience. It was designed to nourish the body just enough to perform its duties while starving the sinful appetites of the flesh. Pleasure in all its forms was a spiritual danger, and culinary pleasure was one of the most potent. You take your seat on a simple wooden bench. In front of you is a wooden bowl, a spoon, and a hunk of bread. But this bread is a revelation. It is made from good quality sifted wheat flour, the kind of bread known as mange that you once saw delivered to the Lord's manor. It is pale, soft, and wholesome. After a lifetime of gritty, adulterated rye or maslin bread, this feels like an unbelievable luxury. You take a bite. It's the best bread you've ever had. And you will have this same bread every single day for the rest of your life here. A server monk moves silently along the tables, ladling pottage into your bowl. This is not the familiar, murky, perpetual stew of your village. This pottage is made with fresh water from the monastery's own clean well. The vegetables, leeks, onions, cabbage, peas, are from the monastery's immaculate and well-tended gardens, which you may have been working in just hours before. There are no mysterious, gritty bits, no hint of sourness from days-old leftovers. It is wholesome, nutritious, and clean. It is also almost completely unseasoned. The rule encouraged abstemiousness, which meant a light hand with even basic seasonings like salt. Spices were out of the question, seen as a decadent luxury that inflamed the senses. Your pottage tastes quite simply of boiled vegetables. It's like a dish from a modern health food spa, minus the Instagram filter and the 5-star reviews. During the meal, there is absolute stance. Conversation is forbidden. The only sound is the monotonous droning voice of a single monk, the lector, who stands at a lectern and reads aloud from the scriptures or the lives of the saints. You eat slowly, methodically, the scrape of your spoon against the wooden bowl echoing in the vast quiet hall. There is no laughter, no discussion, no community in the sense of shared conversation. Eating is a solemn meditative act, a time for spiritual nourishment, not social interaction. You desperately want to tell the monk next to you that the pottage is particularly watery today, but the thought is a minor sin in itself. The rule of Saint Benedict famously forbade the consumption of the meat of four-legged animals for all except the very sick. So your protein comes from other sources. You are served beans and peas cooked simply. On a good day, there might be eggs from the monastery's chickens or a piece of cheese from their dairy. And of course, there is fish from the well-managed monastery fish ponds. It's the same carpent tench the Lord has. But here it is not disguised with a powerful sugary sauce. It is simply baked or poached, its muddy flavor presented without apology. There is, however, a quirky little loophole, a small concession to human frailty, known as a pittance. A pittance was an extra dish or a small indulgence granted on a feast day to honor a visitor or as a reward for extra work. Might be a piece of finer fish, a small pastry made with honey, or a richer cheese. The word itself, which today means a tiny inadequate amount, comes directly from this monastic practice of a small charitable extra. The arrival of a pittance on your table is the most exciting culinary event you can imagine. Historians still argue whether the strict dietary rules, particularly the ban on meat, were followed to the letter, especially as monasteries grew richer and more powerful over time. Archaeological evidence from some monastic sites shows a surprising number of non-fish bones. This has led to the theory of the misericord, a separate dining room where the rules were relaxed. Here, monks who were ill or had been recently bled by the monastery's physician could be prescribed a restorative meal of chicken or even beef away from the main refectory. It was a clever way to adhere to the letter of the law in the main hall, while bending it significantly behind the scenes. Here in this clean, orderly world, you will not get Saint Anoni's fire. You will not get food poisoning from a shady innkeeper. You will not wear your teeth down on sandy bread. But you are in a different kind of culinary prison. It is a prison of deliberate, sanctified monotony. The diet is designed to quell desire, to blunt the senses, and to turn the act of eating from a pleasure into a simple functional necessity like breathing. The food is the best quality, safest, and most reliable you have ever had. And it is without a doubt the most profoundly, intentionally, and soul-crushingly boring food in history. And so here you stand at the end of this long and unappetizing road. You have been both the shivering peasant in the smoky hut and the drafty lord in the great hall. You have felt the gnawing emptiness of the hungry gap and the bloated exhaustion of a 5-hour feast. You have tasted the grit of despair and the cloying sweetness of status. From this vantage point, looking back at the two extremes of this world, You can see the truth with a gut-wrenching clarity. The entire system was broken, a spectacular failure from top to bottom. It wasn't just that the food was bad, it was that the entire concept of food had been corrupted. For the peasant, for the vast majority of people, the system failed because it could not reliably provide the one thing it was supposed to sustenance. Your life was a testament to this failure. It was a life defined by monotony, perpetual cycle of brownish-gray pottage and brownish-gray bread. It was a life of constant low-level anxiety, a race against rot pests, and the ever-present threat of starvation. The food was not just bland. It was actively hostile, wearing down your teeth with grit, poisoning you with fungus, and failing you completely during a bad harvest. It was a diet of pure function where the only goal was to ingest enough calories to work the land that would in turn produce more of the same miserable food. There was no joy, no choice, and precious little nutrition. It was the original farm-to-face plant experience. Then you cross the great divide into the world of the nobility, and you find a system that is broken in a completely different, almost more insidious way. Here, the problem is not scarcity, but a grotesque and hollow excess. The rich did not eat better. They just ate more and more bizarrely. Food was no longer about nourishment. It became a weapon in the arsenal of social status, a medical chart, and a theatrical prop. The goal was to eat your wealth, to put your power on the table for all to see. This led to a cuisine of pure artifice. Tough, stringy peacocks were reassembled into inedible sculptures. Good meat was buried under a cloying blanket of sugar and spices, not to make it taste good, but to prove you could afford the sugar and to hide the fact the meat was going off. It was a culinary world that would get 0 stars on Yelp, mostly because the reviewer would likely die of a tooth abscess before he could post. This entire broken system was propped up by a powerful ideology, the mainstream philosophical concept of the great chain of being. This held that every single thing in the universe, from God down to the lowest stone, had its own fixed place in a divine hierarchy. This applied to people kings, lords, peasants, and it applied to their food. The Lord ate the crane that flew high in the air closer to God. You, the peasant, ate the turnip that grew in the dirt. Your diet was a reflection of your soul's station. This philosophy justified the inequality, making the peasant's starvation and the Lord's wasteful excess seem like a natural God-given order. The Lord's kitchen was a testament to this obsession with performance. A quirky historical detail is the sheer level of specialization among kitchen staff in a great household. You wouldn't just have a cook, you'd have a master cook. And under him, a spicer who handled the precious spices, a sorcerer for the sauces, a wafer for making delicate dessert wafers. This wasn't just for efficiency. It was conspicuous consumption of labor, proving you could afford an army of specialists to create your theatrical meals. Historians continue to debate whether the medieval food system should be judged as a complete failure or as a remarkably resilient, if deeply flawed, adaptation to immense technological and ecological constraints. It's true that without modern transport, chemistry, and technology, they did what they could. But at the core of the problem remains. For rich and poor alike, the food was a lie. The peasant's pottage was a lie of sustenance, offering bulk without reliable nutrition. The noble's feast was a lie of pleasure, offering spectacle without genuine flavor or comfort. You are left with two final foul morsels. In one hand, you hold a lump of the peasant's bread, gritty, sour, but honest in its desperation. In the other, you hold a piece of the Lord's sugary meat, a riot of expensive spice and cloying sweetness, desperately trying to hide the taste of decay beneath. Both are the product of a failed system. Both are in their own way the worst food in history. One is the food of a body in peril, the other the food of a culture that has lost its senses. And so our long, strange meal comes to an end. We can leave this world of perpetual pottage and gilded peacocks behind, letting the smoke of the peasant's hearth and the cold draughts of the Lord's all fade into the quiet murmur of the past. Let the memory of the gritty bread and the cloying spicy sauces dissolve, and allow yourself to return to the simple, clean reality of your own quiet room. Think for a moment of the reassuring hum of a refrigerator, a modern magic that holds decay at bay with a gentle, constant breath. Consider the clear, cool glass of water you can drink without a moment's fear. A simple luxury that would have seemed a miracle in the world we just left. Here in the safety of your own time, the anxieties of survival can give way to a softer, slower rhythm as your own body prepares for a restful sleep, secure in the knowledge that your next meal will be neither a punishment nor a performance. The images of that distant, difficult time are softening now. The sharp edges of hunger and the garish colors of the feast blending together, becoming less a harsh reality and more a story that has been told. The tale is over. The journey is done. All that is left are the fading whispers of history, lulling you gently toward your dreams.